All right, folks, we can have a seat. Let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to the second day of your Judiciary Committee meeting, Joint Judiciary. And our first couple hours here are continuation of justice reinvestment. On your desks, to the legislators, you have a new little packet. It is 6 pages. Each page talks about a section. And that's what we worked on yesterday, the bigger picture. So we're going to work off of this little document today, this morning, for the next couple of hours if we need to. And based on who's in the room, I think we're going to start with page 4. Since the judges aren't here and the AG's office isn't here, I don't believe, we're going to go over to page 4. The title, Delivering Adequate Supervision and Programming to People with the Highest Risk and Need. And the way we're going to work through this morning is good folks from CSG, if you're ready, we will give you a shot at kind of going back through, giving us a brief statement on the analysis on policy options. We'll invite the agencies that are affected by this particular topic to speak, public comment, and then the legislature. And so with that, any questions about the format from the committee? Staff? Yes.
I wonder if we could ask Tori to talk a little about the microphone and how we went over. We live streamed yesterday. If there's anything we need to know about that, would be helpful for you.
Please. Mr. Chairman, the report I've gotten from our office as we're listening to it is that generally the microphone is working well and the live stream was picking up audio. I think the far side of the room is more critical to use the handheld mics than this side of the room, but optimally everybody that can use the lapel mics would be great. Again, off on button on the top, let us know if your battery. So light is red, get you know.
Are the mics sensitive enough to pick up if they're laying on the table, or do we need to pick them up and speak right into them? I think yesterday it was working off the table.
Yeah, they should be fine on the table.
Okay.
So.
Perfect. And again, they'll just speak up so the mics hear you and everybody else in the room. And when you come up to the table, please announce yourself, your name, your agency, or who you may be representing. And with that, please, Marc.
Good morning, Chairman Christensen. Good morning, Chairman Kirkbride. It sure feels nice to be closer to all the members of the Joint Judiciary Committee. Certainly was easier back there having access to the screen and all that technology. Being near the coffee also helped. As you might have seen, I went through about 2 or 3 large coffees yesterday, but it sure feels better being up close with you all today.
We all know each other, but for the folks live streaming and listening out there, just go ahead and state for the record.
Will do, Mr. Chairman. My name is Marc Pelka. I work at the Council of State Governments Justice Center.
Jennifer Kisela with the Council of State Governments Justice Center.
And we are thrilled to be back in front of you. We had several coworkers back in our offices who were watching the live stream and taking advantage of it. And we got several pieces of feedback regarding my presentation skills. We also got feedback on the stamina of you all and how dedicated you were as public servants throughout the entire day yesterday. We told them we'd be wrapping up at a certain point. They said, you're still going strong. When's this going to end? Is it all-nighter? And I said, no, it'll break at some point. We have more work to do today. So I really hope that everybody had a good night, a good rest, a chance to recharge a bit. This is my second time in Laramie, and it was a real delight to be back. I was not reliable for any restaurant recommendations. Luckily, Grace had a friend who grew up here to give us some good places. Wanted to perhaps give the big picture, kind of summary of the kind of the content that we covered yesterday, and then as Chairman Christensen mentioned, we'll go through the analysis and policy options in the document that you all have in front of you. I think the statistics that compelled us when we first heard of interest among your state leaders in using a justice reinvestment approach concerned the prison population's growth over from 2008 to 2018, 21% growth in the prison population, causing our prison system to reach full capacity, causing the system to rely on contract jail beds, out-of-state private prison beds to accommodate growth in the prison population. Along with that growth, there is a projection of growth in of 9% over the next 5 years, which is an additional 20 beds of people who will be locked up. And Wyoming is already beginning to feel the bite of the cost resulting from that growth. Some examples are the $1 to $2 million contract per year for the contract beds, additional funds for the contract jail beds, and then even the request for an expansion of the Torrington facility in next year's budget. Now, prison population is about one metric of your criminal justice system, and just understanding what the factors that are driving that was what I think prompted our initial analysis in May. And that was what guided us toward the impact of the probation and the parole revocations coming back. They comprise 54% of your prison admissions in 2017, and they are a substantial driver of growth in your prison admissions. What I think beginning with that, those key questions allowed us to do was drill into key components across your criminal justice system. In some ways, the prison population, admissions, and population is the kind of outgrowth or is affected by numerous complex systems that exist much earlier in the system. And digging deeper into the issues in your state kind of drove us toward trends involving drug-related offenses and supervision violations driving increases in arrests, criminal case filings, supervision revocations, and prison admissions here in the state, straining both criminal justice system responses and community behavioral health treatment delivery. Second, we were drawn toward people who are at high risk to fail on probation and parole, aren't receiving adequate supervision and programming to reduce recidivism, while low-risk people are receiving a greater intensity of those supervision and programs than should be required. And third, community-level sanctions are failing to stop violations and promote positive behavior change, which leads to the increased cost that comes from those revocations I mentioned earlier, and saps resources from the community where treatment is shown to have a greater impact on recidivism reduction. In going through these areas, we certainly identified some opportunities to not only increase investment in areas, but also areas to recalibrate how you're currently assigning supervision, your programming, your violation sanctions, and even your revocations. And that helped us to see some emerging strategies to help you avoid costs and reinvest in strategies to lower recidivism. The first involved focusing supervision resources on people who are at a high risk to fail on supervision during the period when their recidivism is the likeliest. Second, deliver swift and certain proportional community sanctions with programming to reduce recidivism and impose swifter, more cost-effective periods in prison following revocation. And third, expand the availability of timely, evidence-based treatment for people on probation and parole who have substance addiction and or mental health needs across Wyoming. So those are some of the big picture areas that confronted us as we sought yesterday evening to kind of debrief after all the information that we worked on during the full day of meeting yesterday. And I think the questions that we have involve what are some ways that Wyoming can best address those system challenges and put itself on a course toward implementing strategies to avoid heavy correction costs and reinvesting some of those savings into public safety strategies. So the approach that is available to you is to view this as a public safety plan that, if enacted this year, would allow you for 5 years of tracking. Just as we delved into the analysis to prepare for yesterday's presentation, you would be able to use support during the implementation process with us as staff and through your agencies and stakeholders to really look at to what extent you are bending that curve on the key criminal justice system measures, which will include your prison population, your recidivism rate, your outcomes on supervision, and a host of other areas that you can include in tracking moving forward. So this is not these challenges I mentioned cannot be solved overnight, but you, I hope after yesterday, feel that with additional analysis, the additional input you've gotten from your stakeholders, you're on a course moving forward to really tackle some of these key challenges. And We have never delivered in a single meeting presentation exceeding 100 slides, and as I said yesterday, I hope the quality matched the quantity. But behind those numbers and the charts and the colors and the tables was input that we got from your criminal justice system stakeholders. That's why we shared the map with you of where we went around Wyoming. And everywhere we went, we were given open doors, whether it was the jails that I visited, thanks to Byron's introductions, whether it was the adult community correction centers, whether it was the probation and parole field offices, the courts, etc. Everywhere we went with our questions, and we had a lot of them, we were given access. And I think to the extent this was a quality document and presentation yesterday, it's a credit not just to the analysis that Ed did and the work that Grace, Jen, Raquel did assessing your system. It was also the guidance we got from your key agencies, criminal justice system stakeholders, the people who live criminal justice risk reduction on a daily basis. So we really hope, chairs of the committee and to the members, that we can rededicate ourselves as staff assisting you over the next roughly 2 months to dig back into data, policy and bill drafting, but also re-engage those agencies and stakeholders that helped us to put forward analysis that we hope felt like it was tailored and that had a fit for your system. And so as Chairman Christensen guided me to, I'm going to go through the various sections from yesterday's presentation and discuss some of the areas that we think haven't covered in other states and statute, might be a good fit for your state and statute, and what could be covered in policy or budget or training and practice. The chairs guided me toward that yesterday as one of our areas we could provide feedback on and guides moving forward. I'd also ask that you would grant us the capacity to, in the next 2 months, reconnect with the agencies that would be, as Chairman Christensen said, charged with developing and implementing any policy changes, just so that we can figure out, with what we have available in the analysis, with what they have and technical expertise, to find what is the right fit. We really want to support the committee's efforts to come back in November 15 and 16 with a well-developed bill that has input reflecting the various stakeholders who would be charged with implementing this, and to really help you wind up at the end of November 16th with a solid public safety plan heading into the legislative session.
All right, again, we're going to start with section 4. We have about 20 minutes per section. Folks, we have a protected end of the day. So Marc's going to give us a brief statement, page by page, and topic by topic, and we'll work that, but we are limited on the courts coming in. Our next series bills around 11 o'clock. Yeah, we're pretty full of it this Friday afternoon. We'll stay here late to the afternoon as we need to tonight if you like, but preferably we'll move along.
Thank you, Chairman Kirkbride. If it would work for the committee, recognizing time, I think that the first 2 pages in the packet are, I'm just going to try the same packet as you.
Let's go with page 4. The reason is you don't have the judiciary here. Page 2 is primarily talking about that, and I don't see the Kara from the AG's office here on victim witness on page 3. So if they don't make it, we'll come back and work without them. But
It's perfect sense.
we'll start on the
Okay, so page 4, this analysis is the first kind of policy options put forward included focusing supervision resources during the initial years of a person's probation or parole term when risk of recidivism is the highest. So for this section, we looked at the recidivism rates and when they occur. And for the probationers, 2/3 of recidivism, if it is to happen, occurs in the first 3 years. And actually, it's in the first 2 years. 2/3, sorry, within the first 3 years of a probation term, 85% of revocations occur. 2/3 happen in the first 2 years. So you're left with only 15% of revocations happening after that 3-year period. Yet 60% of people placed on probation have terms longer than 3 years. So the goal here is to identify the timing when recidivism is the likeliest and focus your probation resources where it can reduce recidivism the greatest. So you have an ability to put into your statutes a cap on the length of a probation term. You can build that cap in ways, a variety of ways, essentially, but figuring out the right language to put that structure around the length of your probation term would allow you to direct your resources earlier on in the term when recidivism is the highest. And this will probably require statutory change. We've noted states across the country that already have caps on their probation terms. We'd be happy to work with LSO on kind of crafting what that would look like and getting input from various stakeholders. But this feels to us as one that would best be addressed through a statutory change.
And that is specifically,
Oh, it would place a cap on the length of a probation term. So it would say at the outset of a probation term, this is the maximum length. The length of the term could be anywhere from 0 up to that length.
right now, it's 5 years, is the length of it.
There is no cap, so it's the length of the conviction. Essentially, there's no cap. There's nothing listed in statute. There's no guidance provided regarding the length. So there are a whole host of examples we can provide to kind of figure out the right fit, but essentially that would be the goal for a policy in this area, is finding, based on input from stakeholders, based on statutory and law review, legal analysis, what is the right way to accomplish that goal of managing the length of probation terms at the outset.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Hicks.
if I may ask a question, so when we looked at the recidivism rates and the duration of probation and parole, was there any attempt to segregate out between, say, misdemeanors, violent versus non-violent felonies on there to see where those fell as far as what had the highest rate of recidivism? So this will tie back in, if we're going to start to look at changing parole and probation sentencing, it's obviously going to tie back to the severity of the criminal activity, I would think. So was there any data that looked specifically at that issue?
Chairman, the analysis we ran was on felony probation alone, because that comprises a larger proportion of your total population. The volume was there. We broke it out. We did not break it out by offense type, and we could tell you though about what factor that had in the length of the term, but we've not run that yet.
Mr. Chairman, even if we could do that as we move forward, look at non-violent versus violent felonies and that recidivism, but like I tell you already, that will be a debate if we start to look at altering those probation and parole sentences. Will be directly related to the type of offense that was. In other words, I think there will be more receptiveness to maybe a non-violent felon reducing that parole sentence versus something if it's a violent felony. So that's something that we're going to have some data to help support that decision.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Pelka, I appreciate your slides yesterday, and on this very topic, I did note that as you get the statistics that you were talking about, the average length of our current terms are about 4 years, and only 13% extend longer than 5. In your research, did you run into any data that suggested that there were certain types of offenses that were receiving those longer sentences, and might it not be the best interest that we have right now to meddle with that, or should we put a hard cap to what your research showed about some of those longer sentences?
So, Mr. Chairman, it's a great question, and in the states that have set a cap on the length of a probation term, they frequently allow exceptions based on offense type to exclude perhaps violent and people with violent or sex offense convictions, to enable the court to impose a probation term longer than what would be the maximum probation term for a person with a non-violent offense. And so that's an element to the drafting that could be done to do that, to create one maximum length for non-violent probation term, and then one longer probation length for a person with a violent or sex offense.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I understand the time. I did want to also ask just what you foresee and what you have heard on the road as far as how much additional staff you might be needed to administrate this program, or could it be done with current staff?
Chairman, we can run the impact estimates on your probation, your parole population. We did have a chart yesterday showing the current and historical and projected supervision population in Wyoming. So for other states, we've estimated impacts of policy changes on that curve, which we want to vet with your DOC director. This policy is intended to be possible with current staffing levels, because essentially it's taking resources that are being expended after, for example, the 3-year term, or being expended in other policy areas on low-risk people and moving those toward the high-risk probationers, as well as the probationers in the early part of their term. So the aim for this is to be cost neutral. There might be other policies that could lead to an increase estimated in the population, but in terms of cost, that's the intention of this policy. Is take what you're currently doing and focus it where it can have the biggest impact on the citizen.
Thank you.
Yes, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You can do that, make up this.
Okay, one quick question on the statute. I mean, we just did that parole has earned good in time, what we don't allow that probation would be, would that be a statutory change that we would include in this bill draft?
Chairman, I think this connects, the senator's question connects with the representative's question, is that there are multiple ways to manage the length and duration of a probation and a parole term. The cap is one that sets it clear upfront regarding the length of time the person is sentenced to serve. And the other approaches that can manage the probation term post-sentencing while the person's on supervision would be a good time policy. The senator referred to Wyoming's good time rules, good time policy, which appears in statute. Essentially what the statutes do is enable the DOC through governor's office rule to provide good time. And as I noted yesterday, good time is applied to people who are in prison and to people who are on parole. It's not extended to people on probation, which is something we inquired about, because you would think that if the policies apply to people who are transitioning out of prison, it also could benefit people who have not been in prison and who are on the probation term.
Okay, any other questions? Yes, Senator Christie.
I know you touched upon it yesterday, but remind me again why we have to have a statutory change to put a cap on. Why could we not have the parole board sets length of parole and the judiciary plays role in probation and parole. Why can't we simply educate those folks about front loading and how effective the last 2 years are and leave some discretion to them? Why can't they do this? Why does it have to be a statutory change? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman, for the statutes would help to achieve consistency, better consistency and predictability across the state. There will be probably a variety of different approaches to sentencing and use of probation, and that's a product of the lack of guidance currently given in statute. Right now, it's just really wide open, so there's no state public policy set regarding these probation terms. So the intention of the policy is to provide greater consistency and also to provide greater predictability by setting a maximum length of probation. There would need to be, as anyone who's kind of implemented policy changes of this nature, there would need to be information delivered across the justice system to the agencies implementing this regarding the aim of the policy.
Mr. Chairman, follow on.
Sure.
You had talked about a sentencing commission. You talked about the Supreme Court gathering some information about outcomes and so forth. Why could this not simply be guidance from the Supreme Court to the judiciary and a determined education program rather than dictated from the legislature? I get it, but why could the Supreme Court not assume responsibility for that guidance rather than us as a legislative body dictate? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I think that I would be curious about whether the rules of criminal procedure or a court rule in general would be adequate to kind of achieve the impact that would be obtained through a public policy change. Part of what helps through statutory policy change in select areas is the ability to have all three branches collectively adopt these policy changes. Legislature passing legislation, governor signing, Supreme Court overseeing. These are typically, in all the states that have caps, they exist in statute, not relying on the rule. So that's the other guidance that we have as we looked across the country at what language is used in policy to promote this outcome. And I think Jen might have some perspective.
I think also from a budgetary and a resource perspective, if the goal of the policy with the caps is to ensure that folks who are successful and who have a low likelihood of failures on supervision are pulled off of supervision in a reasonable amount of time, that allocates those resources to the DOC agents. And so the concern would be is if it's not statutory and there's too much deviation on the judicial end, is that going to be a drain on the resources within DOC and require additional budgetary requirements to increase the number of agents to supervise the population that's on supervision? So it then becomes kind of a budgetary staffing issue if caseloads begin to kind of creep up and get too high.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I just have a question that may be appropriate for DOC or your group if the data was available or if the question was asked. How often probationers are asking to be released from probation early, and how frequently probation and parole agrees with that request, or how often they reject that request, and what are the bases for those rejections, and how often those requests also go to court and the judiciary rejects those requests as opposed to probation and parole. The reason for that is my understanding is the court will generally gives great deference to probation and parole regarding whether or not they agree with that request to be removed from probation. And so there's a lot, the power there really belongs with the Department of Corrections and whether or not someone's going to be removed from probation. And so I'm just curious as to that is where I see the crux of the challenge coming to be, whether or not legislation is appropriate or not, for where that responsibility primarily falls, what information the judge has versus whether or not the probation agent is ready to relinquish control.
Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to start just based on what we've learned, is that there is administrative policy the DOC has that encourages officers to petition the courts for earned discharge when certain criteria are met. And we've seen similar language in other states. What that lacks is a greater spur for that recommendation to be made in a timely manner. And part of it is because it falls on the officer to bring forward that information. There is no reminder or prompt given that the person has perhaps reached a number of months on supervision without a violation, and therefore the time is right to petition the court. So in states that have looked to strengthen that language, they've created it in a way that makes it presumptive, that after someone has served, based on perhaps their assigned supervision level, after they completed a certain number of months on supervision without a major violation, then it would be presumptive for the agent to petition the court. That allows you to budget and plan in ways where you're not relying on individual officers taking actions on their own. In terms of your questions regarding how courts receive the request for early termination of probation, in some jurisdictions there's an automatic refusal, and in some areas there's a different criteria that prompt it. In some areas there's receptiveness to the input of the probation officer for the early termination. There's not the strength of the policy behind that agent to bring the information forward, which makes it really hard for DOC to be able to estimate or predict or budget or plan.
Do you have anything to add?
Mr. Chairman, Steve Lindley with the Department of Corrections. So Judge Dave may be able to reflect from his own experience and conversations with his colleagues. And I think Marc described it well. It's done non-uniformly across the state, and another piece of that whole equation are the prosecutors. So many of the judges, not most, ask for the prosecutor's opinion, and that varies by prosecutor, as one would expect. It would be interesting for us to know what we don't, the frequency that they're requested, and the individual conversations that go on between probation officers and prosecutors before it ever gets to the desk. So that's where it happens, and it's not done uniformly everything regionally. That particular prosecutor. So it's a very randomized approach.
Mr. Lindley, it feels like this part of
conversation I had with the legislator meeting yesterday is people tend to want to be safe. And when it comes down to discussion or discretion, nobody wants to sign a letter that gives an early release and then there's a problem. So the tendency to stretch it on, to kind of cover our bases or cover our backs, all that. We tend to go safe. So maybe what I'm hearing is this idea of acknowledging the numbers, trends, and taking an action helps kind of focus the conversation on where the resources need to be spent, as opposed to let's play it safe and just keep extending until as long as we're absolutely certain that my name on the document is not going to put my career at risk.
I think you're exactly right, Mr. Chairman, and by formalizing it further through statute is a framework and a signal. And after the conversations have been had, Mr. Carroll standing out there, but with the victim piece, with public safety generally, with what is the right, so you have the statistics on how frequently or when people fail. Most fail early on, that's to some extent commonsensical, but it's done more out in research. But there are other issues, I mean, four and a half reasons to sentence someone that courts use. So there are other factors that play into that section. Marc talked about being able to isolate, for example, before Judge Day walked in, if there's a cap somewhere along the way, is one approach. Earned time on probation is another. Formalized beyond the way I just described it is currently operating. So that, and allowing out exceptions for certain violent crimes potentially, which then, you have science, you have recidivism, you have public perception, and you have what victim still is appropriate. And all of that and the complexity.
In your profession, are you confident to a reasonable level that in 2 to 3 years, your agents would be able to identify factors and say this person needs extension? They get to know them that well?
Mr. Chairman, I would answer that yes. There are these other factors that general public or a victim may not see as having been just enough with a sense of justice. But for the purposes of case plan completion, feeding the criminogenic needs, getting into the behavioral health system, if that kind of can't be accomplished in 2 years roughly, and there are other issues going on that's going to impact its success. So aside from those other inputs, just case managing the person.
Thank you. Any other questions on the idea of conversation about caps? Please, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is another component for whether or not being released from probation is appropriate, and something I think that Judiciary Committee should be aware of from a policy consideration if we do go down the road of putting caps on, which is whether or not someone is appropriate for release from probation based on what I would call soft skills, for lack of a better term. Frequently, probationers are required to participate in homework assignments for self-reflection and analyzation, sometimes counseling. They participate in that, but maybe don't pay their counseling bill on time, thus justifying them not being released from probation because they're not currently paying their counselors, versus actually committing new crimes and being a danger to the public and or being a law violator. And so the differences between the social skill development versus crime violating, and the distinction between those two and what is that value for us as a state, and the appropriateness for somebody to be released from probation and parole and state supervision, even though they may not have all of those pro-social skills as developed as one would hope. If what I am hearing as the primary concern from the Department of Corrections is an overburden on the financial costs in our state for the criminal justice system, and we are trying to reduce that. So I think we need to understand that that's the primary request from the Department of Corrections, and so understanding where those values may lie may be very, very important for us to flesh out as we move down that path.
Yes, Representative.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I wanted to tell both Jennifer and Marc that the portion of your program yesterday about probation resonated most with me. I was very happy, and certainly consistent with my anecdotal experience, what I see in Kisela County. So I just want to say that I really greatly appreciate that. I like that a lot. One question I wanted, these slides were great, in great detail. If I wanted to just look at the source data, is there a website somewhere, CSU website, where you go and click, is it in the right data? I just wanted to spot check. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, we do not have sort of the data. We have not released the raw data publicly. We'd be happy to provide the backup reinforcement for any of the slides you're interested in. Essentially, what we received was when we received the data from the agencies, we agreed that we would, before sharing it publicly, we would privately review it with them to make sure we were using the correct methodology, terminology, et cetera, to make sure that was clear. And that was enabled us to provide the full slides. But we'd be happy to assist with the additional numbers you want to run. And I appreciate your kind words, Representative. A lot of the, I think the data played a key part. I think also Jen's expertise and experience in probation really helped us to figure out how to right size the information within the system that we're utilizing. Your kind words, sir.
We do not have active links to each of the sources, so, but if there are kind of research-related links that you would like access to, you're more than welcome to contact us and give it or do that, the information that you need if it's content research related versus Wyoming data related.
Okay.
Chairman, I was back a moment. I was reflecting on Senator Nethercott's input, and I was thinking that one thing for the committee to consider, to direct us to, would be to provide multiple, work with LSO on multiple bill drafts for these different policies. We've heard references given to good time, references to a cap, reference to presumptive discharge, and others. And you reflected in your question, if I heard pretty correctly, was the fact that depending on policy design, it can achieve different effects through implementation, and not only through different effects in achieving public safety outcomes, but also impacts on budget and cost, ability to reinvest, and different design in terms of how it would play out in the state. We'd be happy to work on more than one option to achieve similar aims. Cheers.
All right. Okay. Mr. Pelka, as you look at this section 4, your suggestion on legislative action on caps, bill action, thank you. Is there any other legislative action that we required to?
Yes, sir. In descending order, through you, Mr. Chairman, in descending order of requiring statute, I would say the order is C, B, and then D and E. I would C relates to the analysis that, the policy option, letter C, prioritize admissions to ACC and ISP for people on supervision who violate their conditions or who are assessed at being at a high risk of recidivism at the start of their term. So we've been reflecting on the deep insights given by judges, by the ACC directors, by the DOC, by former community corrections board members. We felt that there's a lot of input we could gather from those key constituencies who know community corrections the best. And I think that the policy options that would emerge from that would span statute, administrative rule, and contract. I think that we noted that there are statutes that guide, for example, the community correction board's review of all referrals to ACC. There are also some contract issues that determine how they're budgeted, how they serve, and how they deliver programming. And there are rules regarding how probation and parole respond. we knew a fair amount about the ACC picture going into yesterday. We learned a whole lot more, and we think that the next couple of weeks we can dig in much deeper and reflect on the input that came yesterday. For example, I heard a concern around abolishing community correction boards altogether, recognizing they serve a purpose. I also heard that there are some delays, people waiting in jail to get into ACC, varying criteria for eligibility, weighing who is a kind of higher public safety concern, an inmate status person or a higher risk person. There are plenty of areas within those two poles that I think we can gain input from your stakeholders and help to look at statutory options, rules, and contracting options to get a better outcome from those programs, while perhaps prioritizing a population that would be the best fit for those interventions. So I say statute, Mr. Chairman, because ACC and ISP are referenced in statute concerning admissions. The boards are also listed in statute, and I think with time, the coming weeks, to be ready well in advance of November 15th, we could provide some input reflected, research-driven ideas around letter C.
Questions regarding that? So you're seeing clear legislative remedies. We don't have that today.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, yes.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, that's a product of the input you got to public meeting session, public input sessions yesterday. A lot was shared. We'd like to work on.
All right. That was C.
Yes.
As we think about these, again, ones that were required, bill draft versus required, or could be fixed with policy, internal policy. Any programs?
Last priority for statutory for bill draft is letter B. Use risk assessment results to guide decision-making on supervision levels, case planning, and programming, and allow overrides only when appropriate due to extenuating factors. This is an area where I think statute could guide the overall framework for ways DOC could utilize its compass risk assessment to prioritize programming, supervision, and other factors. So I don't think this would be a lengthy bill draft, but I do think that DOC would want there to be some anchoring in statute for development of rules and training in other areas. So this would be an area where you can preserve discretion while providing a framework for the development of policies and training, et cetera. I've not talked to DOC about this, Mr. Chairman, so I'm stepping a bit over, probably above and beyond, but I just would offer up, this is an example where we would really like to work with the DOC and other stakeholders on a bill draft that could accommodate this while leaving room for policy.
Department of Corrections.
Mr. Chairman?
Come on up. It's going to take us a little more time. If you come up really close to your mic. Just leave the mic at that end of the table because we've got this mic picking up what's happening.
Mr. Chairman, Bob Blanker, Director of the Department of Corrections. Just quickly, in regards to B, use of the risk assessment results. Personally, I think that could either be statutory or we just force it to change once we revalidate the issue. So, in my opinion, it doesn't absolutely require statutory change. Statutory change would make it easier.
You have a pretty clear understanding or a clear vision for your folks about where this is headed and the content as to kind of shook out opportunities for change.
Mr. Chairman, we did.
Committee, questions of Mr. Pelka or our director? Yes, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I'm just curious to know, Dr. Lampert, if you were surprised by the results of the study to show that the volume of the prison population, the increase in that is largely contributed to the Department of Corrections itself through probation and parole revocations. If that fact surprises you, or if you were aware of that, or just your position on that particular data?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, we were not surprised. We were aware of it and have been working on it, but certainly having additional attention and recommendations and professional input from CSG and others assist us in making the internal changes. We have a pretty solid core. Just need to look at the areas that need continual work in some cases. So we do that.
Director Lambert, it's my concern is that you've got an area here that needs to be addressed. Will statutory change give you the support you need, or you're pretty confident you can do this without statutory change? And as a result of this conversation, you'll probably follow the measures.
Mr. Chairman, the advantage of statutory change is it gives us long-lasting deadlines. I can do what I do as director, but there's no guarantee I'll be director after January, so that could be subject to change. So from that perspective, in terms of if the vision is to, in the long term, to use risk assessments to the best advantage that we have and make decisions based on make public safety decision based on using those risk assessments to the best way that the science says. The statute certainly provides additional guidelines that would outlast both Mr. Woodley and myself.
All right, let's go ahead and hold on that one and let the committee come back to that. So is we're in a place where we can invite further agency input.
Mr. Chairman, your discretion, there are two other policy options which I can mention. I don't think that either will require elaborate bill draft. I defer to you, sir, whether you'd like me to complete the page.
Go ahead, let's cover it, because suggestion on action, we can kind of tap on quickly.
Thank you, sir.
That committee decided they won't like.
Thank you. It's enormous value, Mr. Chairman, it's of enormous value to be close to Director Lampert, and hearing him say those words is really inspires me, because it's shown from the beginning he's been allowing us to take a deep look at his system. It's one that he deserves to be very proud of. There are so many strengths, and we're really looking to give suggest ways to really further enhance what he's already created as part of his agency. Letter D is ensure that programs and treatment address the assessed risk and need of people placed on ISP and ACC. I say this is not kind of intricate policy. It could easily stem from letter C before, and it's also going to have perhaps either a budget reallocation or budget allocation. Essentially, this policy aims to ensure that people who receive intensive supervision on ISP or intensive programming in ACC are receiving some programs while they're in those settings to promote behavior change. This is a key area to enhance your community level sanctions so they don't proceed onto the prison on a full-blown revocation. So this could, I guess it's hard to tell at the moment. I don't think it's independent policy. It's connected to letter C. Could also be done through rule or a budget. That's the issue there. Just to keep things moving, I know we're tight on time. Is letter E. I think I request further discussion with DOC beyond today. The director provided some compelling input on this. The policy is required that risk and need assessments be routinely revalidated for quality assurance. I truly would defer to the director on his best sense, and I may require further conversation. But that's some detail that helps the committee on letters D and E on page number 4.
All right. Okay. Committee. Page 4. Any other questions of folks from CSG? Yes, Representative.
So basically the question was, with that last one, he would require additional staffing. I would just want to ask the director about that. What it would take to change the routine, or if you need some assistance in that way.
Please.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Winters, as I mentioned yesterday, currently they were doing the assessment. It's working on 75 items. So we currently validate or revalidate every suggestions every 35, which is doubles or triples cost of the agency. Obviously, I prefer to have a budget designated to do that, which is a preference. However, we want to make a dual ballot allow staff to trust it. So we would get to increasing the frequency of validation 5-year mark, and not the 3-year mark. There's one other thing that I wanted to mention, Mr. Chairman, just in regards to the options were given early release and statutory caps. A third option that's been discussed with the committee in the past is in some way limiting misdemeanor supervision, either in terms of the length of supervision or limiting it to high-risk individuals, DUI, domestic violence, are the specific crimes that we talked about in the past. So that's a third way of statutory controlling resources that we are allocating to the program.
Okay. Questions? All right. Thank you. Let's you just kind of hold up your folks. Public or other agencies, any other agencies impacted by this conversation, and just draw your attention, we talked about bill drafts on capping length of probation, and of course, a laser focus on the highest probability of offense with exceptions. And then on C, that one's not fleshed out yet on prioritizing commissions. And then up on risk assessments, which we heard the department talk about asking for a shot to deal with that. Agencies input on this section or the courts, please. Yes, Judge. Just for the folks who came in late, what we're doing is we started on page 4 on that section, but we're going to go back to page 2, page 3. We work through this process. Yes, Judge. Thank you.
Tim Day from the 9th Judicial District. So, of course, without seeing the proposed bills and statutory changes, it's a little hard to weigh in exactly, but I can convince you that to the extent that you decide that there may be some statutory changes that you'd like to consider, we will do our best to give some more specific feedback to you. With regard to caps on probation, for example, and I guess also probably with using risk assessments for guidelines on what kind of supervision you're going to have. I think it's just important to remember, and I think everybody here would recognize that it's not always a cookie cutter process, and there are going to be situations, and this happens with some frequency, where a judge will read a pre-sentence investigation report and then get to the compass section, which has assessed the risk level, and it's like low, 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 and the eyebrows just go up to the top of your head, like, oh my gosh, how could this be a low risk assessment? That's because these tools are, any tool, I think, is incapable of always addressing every circumstance of the situation, the character of the defendant, and that's when there has to be, a finding by the judge that even though the compass assessment is very low and suggests a very low risk to reoffend, the judge can make findings on the record to say that the court doesn't agree with that. It's not dissimilar to after reading a substance abuse evaluation in a pre-sentence investigation report. It says this person really needs treatment and is a qualified offender, and of course, under the Addicted Offender Accountability Act, there's a presumption that you would then put that person on probation and have them, as part of their probation, undertake appropriate treatment. Of course, in the appropriate situation, you do that, but when there are other reasons not to, then we find on the record that even though this person is a qualified offender and in need of treatment, probation is not appropriate for this reason or that reason. So I guess it sounds like it's been talked about if you decided that it was important to have a statutory change that created some presumptions or guidelines. I could predict that the judges would want to tell you that not every situation is the same. Those tools aren't perfect. And hopefully there's discretion retained from the individual judge making proper findings that they can override those things. Thank you.
Okay. Questions? Division Representative Kisela.
Mr. Chairman. Judge, thank you so much. And every case does have individual characteristics. So if the legislature decided to not impose a cap on probation terms for certain offenses, what do you think would be the best alternative approach to avoid what appears to be a systemic bias in favor of having probation terms too long?
Well, of course, Representative Stick, that chairman.
You're finding this degree completely impartial or agree?
Well, that's why we're the judiciary. You guys have to make that decision. But first of all, I think the judges, like one of the things that I was really interested in Marc's information is what appears to be the evidence-based data to show that people are putting people on probation too long, and the judges need to understand that, especially for low and moderate risk offenders. We need to be considering a lot shorter probation terms, and so to inform the judges of that evidence-based sentencing practice would be really good. To have the prosecutors who are recommending those kinds of things in plea agreements. You can't forget about the prosecutors, because the prosecutors are bringing plea agreements to courts and saying, please accept this. And it calls for a 10-year probation term in exchange for somebody to get a really good deal up front. And I can't speak for all of us. I think those judges are hesitant to second guess prosecutors in plea agreements on a regular basis. They're a lot closer to the ground situation, the victim, and we don't like to overly intrude into their territory and domain by saying, well, I'm a lot smarter than you on this, and we're going to reject the plea agreement, even though, or because it has too long a term of probation. So they need to be looped into this process, and to have some guidelines and feedback would be great. I obviously would leave it up to the committee if you think it's necessary to have statutory changes, but that is another consideration about making sure the prosecutors are in on this.
Representative Jennings.
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
For the judge or?
Mr. Chairman, actually, I have two questions, and one would be to the judge, and the second one would be to Mr. Pelka. To the judge, I would ask, do you get a sense that this is broken, that is what's working, what has been functioning now, that it's broken? And I understand that we're looking at doing some of these things for cost savings. So my second question will be to Mr. Pelka, that in your analysis, I know you can't give a hard figure, but I mean, are we looking at saving a handful of dollars here to possibly shake up an entire process that it may not be broken? So I guess my first question would be to the judge.
Before I answer that, I just want to make sure I I've never really heard the idea that we're doing this for cost savings, but more, how much can we afford to grow budget in the future? So ways to grade going forward, as opposed to, big savings today. So we hear this different. Not sure that we're not accomplishing any big savings with this whole thing, but more about talking about, do we have unlimited funds as we look at the future, or do we change things a little bit to live within our means today? But that's just something that I kind of picked up a little bit from the conversation. Please.
Thank you, Representative Jennings. I guess at least with respect to the probation, while I wouldn't be prepared to rebut anything that Marc has said about people being put generally on, especially low and moderate risk offenders on probation for too long a period of time, that doesn't happen in our jurisdiction. The vast majority of individuals that come before me for sentencing are low and moderate risk offenders. I rarely put anyone on probation for more than 5 years, and more often it's 3 years. And we can predict in our jurisdiction that the probation officer will go to the prosecutor after half of the probation is done and seek an early discharge for their client if they've done well and met all of the objective criteria, they've paid their restitution and their fines, and then the prosecutor 9 times out of 10 will sign off that they reviewed that and they recommend that they're released from probation. So we're seeing people get off of probation in 1.5 to 2.5 years. Those are the majority of people that I deal with. Now, other jurisdictions, unfortunately, have a much higher rate of violent crime, violent offenders, high-risk offenders, and I can't speak for them, but it works very well in our jurisdiction. We've got great probation officers, and I rely tremendously on their judgment because they're the ones that are supervising these folks and they know what's going on. Since I trust them, if they're seeking that, then for any time I'll agree.
Okay. Thank you, Judge. Public or agency comments. Any other agency comments that would be impacted or want to weigh in on this particular topic section? Public. Public comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think
more than Mike will pick you up. Hop on over.
Very good, sir. Thank you. That worked. Let me wrap around a little of this, if I may, from my perspective. And kind of tie some of this together. I take a simple look at some of these things, I hope, and so I can wrap my head around kind of the direction and understanding as well. So I look at the discussion of policy versus statute is almost the same thing. We have a group here, CFG, who's done a great job of providing us an initial data set and asking us for policy change. That policy change can come in policy direction, budget policy direction, or statutory policy direction. I would suggest that at the moment that it's still a little hard to get our head wrapped around which is the most advantageous to accomplish the goal. I would like to, I'm going to ask Marc for some write-up, if you will, on this, of what are the policy changes, and then I'm going to make a little cheat sheet that says, this looks like a budget job, and this looks like a direction job, and this looks like a statute job, to help me get wrapped around how am I going to provide any input at the point when we come to the legislative session, because as you've heard from me before, I argue for policy long before I argue for statute, it's easier to change policy as we go than it is to change statute after the fact. The second piece of that is I also sense we've had a day of data input. We got 80 some other legislators who haven't had that piece, who haven't had the policy direction. And I sense that if we came up with a statute that said 3 years is the cap, the list of exceptions would be a little long, based on their paradigm of where they are in the process versus where you are in the process. And secondly, I think with proper data and information, I think that both the Department of Corrections, the county attorneys, and the judiciary, I think some different things would be happening if they have that information provided to them in a clear manner to look at the statistics and say, hey, if our resources are directed at the 3-year mark, we have this level of impact and lesser of an impact after that. The second half of that is it reinforces the early intervention, early sanctions, early programs, early recommendations across the board have the biggest impact. But yet necessarily have the budgets of the last several years reflected that. We've cut programs, unfortunately, with the budget cuts, the Department of Corrections has cut programs, cut funding to where they aren't in existence in many places. And the only program that exists is if you send someone to jail or if you put them on that level of probation, that then triggers that dollar allocation for that program. If we have policy direction and a budget policy that went with it, many of those things may exist long before, and thus we would have an elimination of that. From our perspective, probation and parole doesn't have enough employees now. So part of this was the discussion of revenue neutral, and part of it may be revenue neutral by virtue of if you aren't supervising a 5-year person and you're supervising a 3-year person, I get, there's some revenue neutral in there, provided you have enough folks to go around in the first place. Arguably, there may not have enough folks to go around in the first place. With that, Mr. Chairman, I think I'll put this section in continue.
Any questions, Mr. Overland? Yes, Representative Weckerly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so, go ahead. I see it now.
Yeah, we're just
Put up two.
No, I said some of the people are good. Thank you. So, based on what you just said, 13% of felony probation terms are longer than 5 years. And so, based on what you said, what the data shows, it appears to me that, I don't know how many cases that would be, but 13, I don't know how much you can make up for the front end. So, are you taking a look, as you take a look at that, basically, is the testimony I'm hearing from you that it wouldn't be direct revenue neutral because the individuals working at that extended period, if you were to transfer them backwards into, it looks like instead of even considering 3 years, when I look at this, we should be looking at 4 years at a minimum because there's a spike in month 43, month 44 that is exactly parallel with about month 31 or 32. And so, anyway, the revenue neutrality question, do you really foresee that we would have to add additional personnel?
Mr. Chairman, let me take a stab at answering that in a couple of different manners. One, I started with the premise that the probation and parole doesn't have enough personnel in the first place. And so I had one. Two, I would agree with the general perception that if you aren't assigning someone to supervise a person year 4 and 5, that they would have time to do more supervision than person 1 through 3. I understand that concept. And the revenue, so from that pure perspective, it may be revenue neutral. However, part of this whole discussion has been what is proper programming that is not present in your 1 through 3, that seems to be focused in your 4 through 5, if I understood the presentation correctly. It needs to be focused in your 1 through 3 with an expansion of programs available in 1 through 3 to ensure success. I think part of the length of time of probation or length of time of service sentence has more to do with the perception of will the person be successful. Will they violate again, recidivise? Will they commit another crime? What can we do to prevent that? We have to do a better job of providing those services early so that they don't do those things. So I think if there's a greater perception that we're doing the right thing, our outcome will be entirely different.
All right, thank you, Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, any other public comment? Please. Strand.
I'm speaking as the Albany County prosecuting attorney and not for the Prosecutors Association. But I can, as I sit here and listen today to all of this, I know what my colleagues will be thinking of this.
Mr. Chairman, just a procedural thing, could we have the witness introduce themselves?
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you had, I apologize, Mr. Chairman. Peggy Trent, Albany County prosecuting attorney. First of all, I have concerns about internally an assessment being recalibrated and how it would be recalibrated for recommendations to the court. Currently, as the tool or what they're using to factoring in Compass, which goes into the PSI, is not taking into a lot of factors in which the prosecutors bring forth in the courtroom. For instance, domestic violence. I know there was a recommendation that this needs to be addressed in their tools, whatever they're assessing, sexual assaults, different items of information. The information that I have in my court file that I provide to probation and parole to write those PSIs does not always contain all of that information. If we speak with victim witness, we may have outside sources of information. So it's sort of factoring or working around the opinion of the prosecutor that we bring forward, taking into this consideration. A lot of times right now, what you're starting to get into, in my opinion, is sentencing guidelines. I've worked under sentencing guidelines in the state of Ohio. I was there prior and after sentencing guidelines, and that's what you're essentially doing. You're creating a decision matrix, bottom line, the assessment tool. It's looking at various factors, and then it's brought forward. We're making a recommendation to, as Judge Day said, to whether it's low, medium, and we're looking at it going, well, did you take this into consideration? Did you take this into consideration? So that's where we get into the list of extenuating circumstances to deviate from the recommendation of that decision matrix. If you get into, from a defense standpoint, then, is this constitutional, what you're doing? What if you did this extenuating circumstance and you didn't consider this for Johnny, but you included it for Sam, and you're getting disparity in sentencing still? Because unless you come to the court where you have guidelines with specific items in the decision matrix that are extenuating that you can deviate from the initial, I don't know how you're gonna have disparities in sentencing again. And when we get back, what are you really trying to do? And I wasn't here for the afternoon session yesterday, I read through the slides, but we already established we have an increase in drugs in our state. It seems to me a lot of the revocations that we're seeing coming forward are drugs. We're seeing a lot of reoffending, and absolutely I agree with those statistics just from what I've observed. In the first year to two, if someone's going to fail, it occurs then. Problem you'll hear from the prosecutors, and in Albany County as well, we're not hearing when somebody reoffends, has a dirty urine, has reoffended, they're internally handling that. And then all of a sudden they commit this offense and we're learning, well, what did you do with this? How come we didn't know about XYZ occurring and leading up to this? So we don't get a full picture at times before revocation. If it's drugs that we're seeing, then treatment needs to be expanded. Why we would limit and seal probation and parole, I'm not sure. If we need that flexibility, if they're going to reoffend, do we just do a new offense? I'm just confused as to why, this whole process. I will tell you with sexual assaults, probably the most effective process I see is with sexual assaults. I don't know if it's done throughout the state, but in Albany County, we have a sexual assault containment meeting where we meet on a monthly basis to talk about our sex offenders. The prosecutor, law enforcement's involved. All of the community comes together, the stakeholders, and we talk about, and that's where real information is being shared as to whether there needs to be a revocation or what needs to be done. Sort of like the multidisciplinary team talking about offenses and how we can redirect, get them help, or do we need to bring them into court. My fear right now is there's a lot of trust in this tool, this assessment tool, and I don't feel it's addressing all of the needs right now that we see.
When you look at this, are you thinking about a particular paragraph, a general statement, or a bigger issue?
I just think that I would say if I was to direct this, I think to allow this to all move internally in House of DOC, to just do what they want, a diversion, to kind of do the assessment frightens me. I think a process needs to be out in the opening with a statutory change if you're going to change something and how we're looking at it. But I guess I feel we're taking several principles here, and I can tell you as a prosecutor listening in and then taking it back to my colleagues in the association, we're going to say it isn't broken. What are you doing here? We see an increase in crime of drugs, and we're just looking at it in different ways. You've talked several principles here. We talked about limiting terms of probation. We talked about good time to apply the probation. You've talked about assessments and recommendation and how we bring that forward. So it's kind of getting confusing to me as I'm sitting here listening. Good time applying to probation. Right now, probation officers come back to us when they want, to release them. I think they wait too long sometimes, but that's their prerogative to come back. But I think you're talking in all kind of sentencing guidelines. You're really stepping, that's what it looks like to me, you're into. I mean, we haven't gone into low-level misdemeanors. We haven't done that, but you're starting to approach that issue. And being from Ohio and coming from Wyoming, some of the beautiful things that you have here, the ruralness and how we do it is beautiful. And we're about to step into something that's concerning.
Keep in mind that this is our second meeting, we'll have another meeting. How this ends up by the third meeting could look completely different. And then we have a whole legislative process. This is all really recommendations, if there is any action. So this is far from decided today. We're just trying to see if we're going to head in a particular direction and then we'll focus conversation. Please.
Mr. Chairman. I do, I recognize that you weren't here yesterday
You can
afternoon,
address the
which is,
chair. We don't want to be talking to the audience or other people at the table, just share your comments with the chair.
I recognize that not everyone here was here for yesterday afternoon, but do want to reinforce that we do not recommend that the risk and need assessment drives determination at the judicial end for placement in prison versus supervision. Those should be based on statutory requirements, what's permitted in law and the offense, that the risk and need assessment should help guide supervision intensity and needs while they're on supervision and what would need to be addressed. That's in line with best practices by the National Center for State Court.
Questions of the chair? Thank you very much. Any other public comment? Any other agency or public comment? All right, let's take this back up to the committee. Committee, we've got on section 4, some different ideas out here. Discussion from the committee, potential bill drafts that will move conversation forward. What I hope we come away with is some direction for LSO, possibly direction for agencies, or suggestions to agencies. Senator Kisela.
Mr. Chairman, we could look at one option, which is that caps and does a series of legislative mandates. I think we're probably dead in the water without a determined effort to engage Department of Correction, probation, parole officers, and judiciary, and get them educated on what we've heard. So one bill might simply be to try and identify working through the Supreme Court, the Department of Corrections, any additional money would be needed for the additional training, the additional education. I think we can make, we're so small, I think we can make a lot of progress just by engaging the judiciary and sharing this data. But if we don't do that, we're never going to get anything passed. You know, it's such a small state, it only takes, you know, a couple phone calls from the probation parole officer or a legislator and a judge expressing concern to a legislator passing in the hallway, you're done. You just don't go anywhere. So I'd like to see maybe we have this slate of recommendations for mapping and so forth, but I'd also like to see something that's a little bit softer, that's outreach and education. You make the note, this is only our second meeting, actually. You know, I first met you 4 years ago at my first Judiciary Committee meeting in Laramie, when we were talking about justice reinvestment then. So this is, I mean, we're in the midst of a long journey together. And I think we want to move with deliberation and thoughtfulness, knowing that in the long run, if we are very deliberate, we're more likely to get the right kind of outcome that we want. I think education, training, and collaboration is going to get us a lot further, and ultimately it's what we're going to do with the state anyway. So my thinking the bill would be maybe looking at funding just for that kind of program without dictates or mandates.
Representative Marc. Mr. Chairman, I suppose this dovetails a little off that, but I would enjoy the input of what I appreciate what Mr. Weckerly said. Maybe the next meeting, we get the opportunity to look at what actually belongs in the budget process, what belongs in statute, what belongs maybe in regulation. I think if we, instead of trying to tell us to draft a bill right now, maybe we could have a little bit more time and the November meeting have a little bit more information as to what might apply where and how would be the best way to keep this particular element.
Mike, go ahead, Senator Hicks.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think there's been some good information supplied here and what the constraints are, what we're looking at. And I appreciate Byron's comments about the 3 different policies, but I will tell you those are not independent. They're interrelated. So everyone affects the other. And also the astute recommendations of my colleague, Senator Kinski, on the education component. Well, let me assure you, my 8 years of experience on this committee is the best way to get people to show up and educate them is through a bill draft. And so consequently, and as we well know, as the members that have been on this committee, yourself and myself, Mr. Chairman, for 8 years, this is a journey, and I think that's what Senator Kinski indicated. We're 4 years into this criminal justice reform. But here's my concern. If we don't come out with some concrete bill drafts, not to say that it's going to get through the legislative process, but it sets up the discussion for next year. You folks sitting in the audience, the members of this committee are going to change, and they're going to change substantially between now and next year, and we lose this educational component that we've all gone through. And so we just set the process back another year. And I think given the endeavor of the 4 years that we've been on this criminal justice reform, to continue to move it forward, I'm going to be fully supportive that we come out with some bill drafts, especially when we look at sentencing guidelines, or not sentencing guidelines, the statutory recommendations on probation and parole. I think that's the appropriate instrument to keep this discussion live at this point in time. The fiscal component of that, the reality is we have a $660 million structural deficit in the state of Wyoming. How that's going to play into the reinvestment component of that. But I think we are recalcitrant and do not do service to the 4 years on criminal justice reform if we just say we're going to kick this down the road to a committee that's going to look a lot different than what we look like today. So, Mr. Chairman, fully support moving forward with a series of recommendations. this committee can pick up next year and work through the session.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Senator.
I just would like to say that I support Senator Hicks's position 100%. I do think it's appropriate that we direct LSO to do a mill draft. I think the time is now. I think we've received very focused and direct information about the challenges we have in our criminal justice system to focus on reinvestment, and we have a targeted solution for that. And we've heard from the audience that they're not against changes in statute regarding that. So I do think that thoughtful conversation needs to happen now. Some kind of ideas to consider are factors for when a defendant is eligible to be removed from probation, not only for judicial guidance, but for probation and parole's guidance. Recognizing that there needs to be a very, very clear balance between discretion and statutory direction. Realizing the importance of discretion of both the agent, Department of Corrections, and the judiciary, as well as the prosecutor. All of those need to be balanced. We need to afford significant flexibility for defendants both directions, whether to be removed from probation early or whether or not they need a longer term. And so a basis that allows for that flexibility, but being mindful of the clear guidance that the legislature is providing for when an individual should be removed from probation, and no longer needing that supervision. Some quick ideas to put out there are those factors, including but not limited to the following factors for a court to consider, as well as the option, which we don't currently have in felonies, which is what we're really talking about, is the ability to have a defendant placed on unsupervised probation, which is a common occurrence in our circuit courts for misdemeanor level violations, where they're placed on a period of unsupervised probation where they don't have an agent, or where they have to remain law-abiding, potentially submit to drug testing and have those results submitted to the court. And if there's a violation, then they get brought back into the court system. But there's no particular agent that's providing direct supervision over the defendant. So perhaps a hybrid situation for Wyoming where a defendant is placed on supervised probation, things are going fairly well, we can then remove them from supervised to an unsupervised program where the court still has the ability to have oversight for a defendant that maybe we don't feel most comfortable with, not having that supervisory authority, and we still bring them back in for any additional violations. So I think there's a lot of exciting solutions that we can work through. I think we need to build out. I think we can start working this out and provide solutions now, rather than making this a 10-year criminal justice reinvestment conversation.
So I'm hearing let's move to the way we started this conversation. Cap blank on probation and parole with exceptions. I'm hearing that you'd like to see that kind of a real bill that will excite some conversation around the state, and we're further involved, but it moves us forward. My hesitancy about waiting and seeing what we can grow between now and November, because I think it does a disservice to the public and to the agencies if they don't have time to really work on and discuss some hard language. It can always change in November if we come with nothing and craft out a bill. What that means is there's going to be intense lobbying and criticism trying to tune it in session when you have business. So, yes. Senator Gates, you got a motion?
Mr. Chairman, having listened to my colleagues, I agree with Senators Nethercott and Hicks and wisdom of the chairman.
Is that a second to the motion as it
It is a second.
is correct?
It is a second, whatever you moved.
Senator Hicks, what's your motion?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Kinski seconded that, we're going to break his legs.
Okay, back to the idea of the motion, folks. We're going to run out of time. Yeah. We have a motion on a cap length on probation and parole periods with exceptions. This will give staff something to work toward. It could be a 3-year, it could be a 5-year, it could be a 4-year, whatever you want. But it gives us something for the discussion with prosecutors, with law enforcement, and with Department of Corrections and everyone else. So,
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Hicks.
just as a quick suggestion to help staff get something drafted, what I would suggest is that we just start as the placeholder for parolees, that we use 30 months based on the data that was presented yesterday, that most of the recidivism happens in the first 2 months. And for probation, we use 42 months. Those are just starting points as far as where we would cap parole and probation.
Okay.
And that, I pulled that out yesterday based on the data that was presented.
Okay.
But those are just placeholder numbers, so staff has something.
Sorry, well, we have a motion. And a second. Second, Representative Pelka.
Yes.
So we've got a motion with some hard numbers in it. Starting point, I assume there's going to be yet to be clearly defined exception language, but exception in there for additional length as needed based on all this other things. Okay, folks, on the motion and second, discussion on that motion. To staff, for you, Tori, Brian, you guys, is that fairly clear for the motion?
So far, it is. I guess the question that I have, maybe my misunderstanding, but I thought the suggestion was on probation as the initial sentence as opposed to capping parole. I think it gets more complicated there because you're perhaps then simply just lowering the maximum penalties.
Okay. Probation specific?
Mr. Chairman, maybe we need to draft that up as 2 separate bills. One for probation and one for parole.
Do we have anybody from the parole board here today to defend what we're about to do?
Mr. Chairman, so you certainly do. I would agree with Mr. Racines that there would be some issues. Sorry, Mike Causey with the parole board, executive director. There would be some potential issues with regard to parole if a parole cap were instituted. Just thinking off the top of my head, one of the issues you would have is effectively you have the executive branch changing the judiciary sentence. And I don't know if that is what this committee.
And your motions stands regarding parole or primarily is it just on probation?
I'd still like to see 2 different bills for discussion, Mr. Chairman. One for probation and one for parole. For our November meeting, and then we can flesh out some of those issues and then determine whether we would want to move that forward or just take that up again as another next year.
Thank you. To the committee, yes.
Just a question.
Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
On the bill, proposed bill.
With that bill, on those exceptions, does that give the power back to the court in those exceptions that would, no, we have some exceptions here, there's different issues that come up so that they can extend that? Is that what we're talking about on exceptions? I mean, I don't want to take the power away from the court when there's some other issues. I mean, is that what this bill's doing?
We're seeing nods and we're seeing no's. The intent of your motion, Senator Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, I think the intent of the accession is to give the court systems the discretion, prosecutors the input at time under those scenarios where you may want to go beyond those statutory limits. And I think that is appropriate in certain cases to get that input and then provide that opportunity for prosecutors to weigh in, victims to weigh in, and the court to make a decision as to whether we want to have an extension of those systems to set that statutory provisions.
So your intent is a pretty bare bones motion, 42, 38, whatever those numbers were, with an exception, some exception language that will have me put on it in November conversation.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Senator Nethercutt.
I think, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that that's fine. I think possibly maybe what we should do as well is a third bill draft then that goes along with this. With the reference to the rule of criminal procedure 39 regarding what a modification of probation can look like, and really kind of focusing in on those concepts for when somebody can be removed from probation or have probation modified, understanding what those factors are, statutory guidance to the court, probation and parole, for when we can have that look differently. Recognizing again, that discretion that's important. I guess a question for LSO too right now, if they happen to know the answer, which is whether or not a court has the ability to go beyond the statutory guidance for a probation term. I think the answer for that is no, but.
Okay, thank you. So what I'm hearing is we've got a conversation on the motion. We've got a suggestion for a third. Bill is going to answer some of the concerns that are being discussed on this motion. And let's go back to this motion and then we'll come to yours once we close this motion. All right, discussion on the motion and stands. It's been seconded. Are there any amendments to the motion in the committee? All right, this is not a final draft. It's not a roll call. It's just a yea or a nay. All in favor of the motion, please say yea. Aye. Aye. Yea. Noes. Any no? Any nays? Okay, George, Ryan. Pretty bare bones, but starts the conversation.
So, as I understand the motion, there's direction for LSO to draft 2 bills to limit probation to only 2 months in felony cases and to limit parole to 30 months in felony cases.
42. Here it's 42 months, 42 or 30.
42 for probation and 30 for parole.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's one motion covers 2. All right, we had all yeas, so thank you. All right, another motion. I think I heard from Senator Nether got one to say.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
I move that LSO draft another bill draft directly addressing when probation can be modified and or terminated. The factors supporting that by working with CSG to understand what some of those factors should be, recognizing it should be included but not limited to type of language to allow the maximum amount of discretion for prosecutors, probation and parole agents, and the courts to analyze those factors, but to provide some statutory frameworks for when it is appropriate to have someone removed from probation and or to have probation modified. Also allowing for the option at the felony level for unsupervised probation to be administered by the courts to alleviate the burden on the Department of Correction, but still allow judicial oversight over criminal defendants who may no longer need the need for supervised probation, but it may be a good idea to have some continuing judicial oversight over the defendant.
Second?
Second.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second. One of the key factors in this is it also adds unsupervised probation.
Correct.
Okay. And a little more specific on work on that. Yes, Tori.
I don't know, I think that's sufficient for us to get started.
Okay. So the motion is fairly clear. We've got a second discussion on the motion or amendments to the motion. Okay. One of the differences, this one adds some supervised probation, a little more specific detail. The first one talks about that has already been dealt with, specific times based on. All right. Need any other discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Okay. All right. On section 4, page 4, other bills, motions for bill draft. Any other motions for bill draft on section 4? Okay. Let's go back to.
Pardon, Mr. Chairman, I'm so sorry. If the committee would like to give guidance or support to letters B and C on page 4, perhaps it's even just setting broad parameters. You'd like us to explore the language to fulfill those policies, we'd be happy to do that. Our effort with, middle column on your page 4 is the to list policy options more in conceptual form that could take the shape in any number of ways, including the way that Senator Hicks described the letter A, Senator Nethercott described her bill. So there's still, we're not unable to come forward with specific language for letters B and C, which would involve some other areas of ACCs. I don't think the committee would consider giving general direction for us to assist LSO on language or speak to the stakeholders, but we're happy to help and intervene in a couple months.
Do you have the time and the resources to help us with this?
Oh, yeah, Mr. Chairman, absolutely, yes. Yeah.
So I guess what I'm suggesting, committee's input, is that we do look at those areas for potential bill drafts or policy suggestions that could or could not be, may or may not be supported by a bill draft, and recognize that since that's not going to come to the committee until the 3rd meeting, that will probably be good information to look at individual members for a bill draft, or they would like to run an individual bill draft in this session or continue the conversation to going forward as the interim bills in the future. But while we have your resources, that's fantastic.
Mr. Chairman, just to thank you, and to be clear, we certainly recognize that these policy options were first presented to the committee yesterday after an entire day or during a day-long meeting, and they really are the first sketch of the policy options. We truly want the committee to have as many options available with as much detail as possible in the form of the bill draft. So please do count us as working intensively during the next 2 months between now and November 15th, 16th. And our activities can include working with LSO, providing information ourselves to answer additional analysis the committee would like, bill language ideas from other states or based on the concepts we provide, and also meeting with stakeholders who experienced this information for the first time yesterday. We'll be on site and available by phone to help to provide information to the stakeholders.
My inclination is to thank you for that offer and accept it generously. Appreciate the time. We just will not have the luxury of being able to have a bill cracked out before our next meeting. Regarding those, that certainly doesn't stop us from identifying a clear need in the Any other requests based on this set of topics with CSG? Okay, thank you, folks. Let's go back. On page 1, I don't know if we need to. I think you guys talked about that. Do we focus on page 2 now?
Yes, sir. I think that page 1 we talked about, page 2.
Recognizing the time,
Given the time constraints, sir, I don't think that either of those are, Mr. Chairman, either of those 2 policies are worthy of discussion around statutory change. They're ones that we can explore with the agencies separately. Sort of the idea that letter A includes providing judges, Mr. Chairman, with recidivism outcome data to inform sentencing options, including probation, ACC, ISP, prison. I mean, there could be a requirement, I should offer, if it were to appear in statute, I could imagine indicating that on an annual basis, the Department of Corrections, perhaps other agencies, would be required to submit current recidivism information, not relating to every individual coming up for a sentence, but current, sort of similar to the statistics you saw in this presentation, to ensure that moving forward, this information is collected, analyzed, and made available to decision makers for their own discretion and consideration. Mr. Chairman, letter B, analyze available sentencing data and routinely report reasons why a person who qualifies for diversion to supervision and community treatment under the Addicted Offender Accountability Act was sentenced to incarceration instead. This is a way to preserve your full sentencing discretion, not touch anything or have anything to do with sentencing guidelines, rather provide information which I don't think is currently available statewide regarding reasons why decisions are made regarding AOAA. And the information is not to be used to question or criticize or undermine the independent discretion of the judges, rather is to identify for the state the factors that contributed to the decision of a eligible offender not receiving a sentence to AOAA, which could be lack of treatment, lack of available trained probation officers, etc. So I shouldn't have assumed that these are not statutory. I hope that my description of them provides the committee with options to consider how to proceed. So,
to the judges, welcome Judge Christensen. Thank you for joining us. Judge Dave, would either of you representing their groups or individual opinions like to see statutory fixes coming off either A or B? Or is it good information, could help your organizations internally?
Like I said, I think the judges would really appreciate the feedback and that information as it inform them to do better evidence-based sentencing practices and what's really happening in the recidivism world that we don't always find out about. I mean, my personal opinion is I don't see why a statute would be required. I mean, that's all, but I think we would appreciate the feedback.
Judge Christensen, you just kind of popped in on us here.
Mr. Chairman, I think that, as I've said before, we appreciate all options.
We'd like to see statutes having the Attorney General provide all that information and analysis. Have I missed any other members of the judiciary since I started calling out individuals? Okay, thank you. Ms. Sharp, on behalf of the
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to ask, now that Judge Christensen was here, one of the suggestions of DOC, and I know that we had discussed this before in a prior year, was eliminating probation in misdemeanor cases. But I think that the circuit court judges might have a little input on that and feel that that's actually important. But I would leave that to Judge Christensen.
Chairman. Yes, there are certain cases.
Thank you. Committee, any questions or suggestions of the judges at this point in conversation? Senator Undercut or Mr. Pelka?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a question for how frequently Department of Corrections is providing probation agents in misdemeanor cases only.
Yes, Mr. Levin.
Mr. Chairman, Steve, one of the Department of Corrections, it varies widely across the state. I think I should ask Marc that. I think maybe 40% of the caseload statewide is.
Mr. Pelka, do you have input?
I'd be happy to help, and only because I have this data from our presentation in front of me. It's hard to, that's the only reason I have it here and I can remember it. We did not look at the analysis that Mr. Lindley mentioned regarding caseloads of misdemeanors. I can tell you statewide in Wyoming, misdemeanor probationers comprise 24% of the total supervised population. And in terms of the districts where misdemeanor probation is utilized as a sentencing option, it's most common in particular judicial districts. Now, there's variation. Some use it very little, some use it more often. I think in Fremont, Albany, and Natrona were 3 counties where we saw a higher utilization of it as sentencing, but statewide, 24% of the supervision population is misdemeanor probationers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for just for a piece of clarification for my understanding. Those defendants are only misdemeanor circuit court defendants. They are not both charged with a felony and a misdemeanor. Those are solely misdemeanor defendants that we are providing full probation agents to supervise.
Mr. Chairman and Senator, occasionally you can have someone on both probation and probation, but the vast majority of these
When you're a little ways from the mic, you can speak up all the way through it.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, is there any way we can equate that to dollars?
Mr. Chairman and Senator, in what respect the number of staff it takes to supervise that number of people?
Yes.
yes, we can do that. You end up with aggregated averages across the state that create certain problems. So, for example, Laramie County supervises almost no misdemeanors, and Natrona County has several hundred. In fact, that's the difference in the size of almost the probation office, about twice the size of Natrona as it is in Cheyenne. And that's what counts. So, but we're undergoing a workload study in probation right now that will go on for the next 10 months. And if you study time that entire amount, that's how long the process will take. At the conclusion of that, we'll have a much better sense of the time it takes for baseball damage. But again, misdemeanors can be classified as low, medium, high. And so it's taking different time just as but so it's a little more nuanced than just pure misdemeanor. So you're supervised at a low level because of course
Mr. Pelka.
So just to add on, sorry, Senator, I hope I interrupt your flow. Mr. Chairman, the number I mentioned of 24% of people on the probation, 1,370 people are on misdemeanor supervision currently. That comprises 24% of your total.
I just want to.
How about if we go with
Correct. Apologies. So supervision admissions at the end of fiscal year 2017, the number that were admitted onto supervision was 1,370. So that's not the snapshot population. That was just the number that were admitted at the end of that fiscal year. So there is a significant number.
Mr. Senator, do you have a particular request to the CSG folks to gather some information going forward? So we have kind of a consistent conversations based on the agency.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I think it's important for this committee to have an understanding of the financial impact that Department of Corrections is experiencing as a result of the high number of misdemeanors on supervised probation in the state of Wyoming. Directed at CSG, I think it's important for us to have an understanding of whether or not this is a common occurrence across the states that you've looked at, or if this is disproportionately high, and whether or not you feel like this is an effective use of supervised probation in relation to misdemeanors.
Okay. All right. Any other questions at this point on this topic?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Quickly, if I may, Byron Notikov, I think there's a data mining question that may help the issue as well. And that is how many people on misdemeanor probation, or how many people on misdemeanors in general, because we do have a disparity of whether or not a person is on probation, parole, misdemeanor supervision. Primarily, as we heard, it's limited to a couple of jurisdictions. How many people from the data perspective go from being a misdemeanant to a felon? And is there an opportunity to provide more services at the misdemeanor level, I think is what part of the data showed yesterday, that may preclude them from becoming felons? If we have that early intervention with a misdemeanor, do we have less felons in the long run? Thus, is it a wise use of dollars early in the process that may provide great benefit in the long run? So I think there's a data mining question that goes with this topic. I don't have an answer for sure without some of that data input, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Co-Chairman Kirk, I remind you again to call on Representative Olson. You have a question, Representative Olson? Yesterday?
So refreshing, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. But no, I do not have a question.
You can save that question.
I'll save it.
Mr. Chairman? So,
Sure.
Mr. Chairman, this is just a reminder that the committee went through this same scenario a few years ago. And yeah, I think there was a lot of different committee, but you walked through it. The request of DOC was to eliminate probation in misdemeanor cases. And the circuit judges thought it's very important, especially in some of the high misdemeanor cases. And so what we did is what you did, or the legislature did, is change the statute and Judge Christensen can help me, but you changed the statute to actually require the circuit judge to set forth, or even, require the judge or the district judge, I believe it was, to set forth specific findings as to why probation was necessary in that instance, and still give those judges that latitude. But Judge Christensen can add to that.
Judge Christensen.
Yeah, that is a finding now. We're also seeing more sentencing provision now that is in supervised probation. Discretion and or counseling. Running things.
Thank you. Representative Still.
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
What's so relative to page 2?
Just a short comment that I think worthy of further study. It's disturbing, coming back to the point about the rule of law and having similar cases decided similarly. It's somewhat disturbing to hear that the punishment you get and how you get treated by the justice system depends upon what county you're in. It's desirable. I'm not saying it's better in Cheyenne than it is in Casper, but it's odd.
Okay. All right. Not hearing, well, to the public on page 2, or agencies, any requests or suggestions on bill drafts on page 2? Good. Any desires on policy being aired out? We're a little limited on time to go into policy suggestions, so I think we're going to focus on legislation and bill drafts. Page 2. Okay. Let's go on page 3. And now we're back to the AG side of the house. We're going to talk about the policy option.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Recognizing the tight timeline you're on, I can indicate that since yesterday's committee meeting, we've not spoken with Kara Chambers, the Director of Victim Services. I would defer to her on whether any of these require legislation, and I would ask her if she's here and would be inclined to speak, whether she would recommend any for legislative drafting. Because our notes to ourselves were, let's talk to Kara and get her guidance.
Thank you.
Petition if I just talk loudly enough right here.
For the people who aren't here, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yes. Good morning. My name is Kara Chambers. I'm the Director of the Division of Victim Services. With the Attorney General's Office. Thank you for all of the work you guys have done so far. I will keep it very brief. I will just go down the policy action starting with A. To let you know, we talked about that a little bit. I do think that it's very appreciative of all the work we did, and as I mentioned yesterday, when you have someone analyze your data, you look at, you really do start to see certain things. The only room for statutory change that I see in section A would be if you wanted to put in a statutory guideline for how long you wanted to make benefits available, you would have to change that. In fact, I feel that our statute is a little vague. It references for 24 months. And so we operate that our program is available for 24 months after the date of the crime, or you put it to law enforcement, because there can be a difference, for example, if you have a child when you did disclose. So if you wanted to expand benefits, I think there's some room for some statutory extension to do that. I would caution that I need to respond into what we're expanding. Using the term good cause to extend time limits for accessing approved benefits, again, I think it's all a good idea. I do think we have those cases where 2 years just simply isn't enough. I would suggest perhaps limiting the extension of benefits to mental health counseling only, because I do feel that's actually really all we're seeing beyond the 24-month timeline. But I do want to say, anytime you have the term good cause, which I love because it's very fluffy to some extent, but what that does is it puts the discretion on my office and my staff, which in turn creates a little bit of stress as far as, well, are we treating everyone the same? Is it just because this victim happened to have a very good advocate, brought this to our attention and made us realize? I'm very conscientious about, from an agency perspective, that all of our decisions are not arbitrary or capricious, that we hold ourselves to that standard. So I sometimes I think statutory guidelines are helpful in that respect, because there is a lot of what we do in victim compensation every day that is largely governed by policy. And again, it's beneficial to have that flexibility, but if you're talking about term limits or time limits or session benefits, I think we should perhaps talk about that. I'm happy to work with what I think I can.
You, B, C, or D? C, courses of action that you're requesting?
I do, very briefly. B, that is actually something already is underway. We are in the process of contracting with YSAC, University, to do an assessment, and we will publish those results when they happen. So nothing new from the committee on that. C and D, this is one interesting. I think this absolutely needs to happen, that I don't believe there's any statutory requirements made, because we already have statutes that allow us to collect restitution, state restitution, or to the Division of Victim Services, etc. But where C and D roll in is collect and publish information about how often restitution is ordered, collected, and dispersed. I don't know that that's the role of my agency per se. I do believe we have to work very closely with the courts. I don't think, again, it would require a statutory change from the committee, but I'd like to, just as the conversation we had prior about, well, who's coming up with this report, who's getting the data, and what are we doing with that? Maybe it's has the thought behind it, but not statutory committee action.
So here you're going to take that information back and see how we're going to.
Absolutely, my office is already underway, a big restitution collection process as far as getting training, other states who work with Justice Reinvestment to keep up their restitution collection process. I have one final little thing, actually not on here, that I might suggest. I hear it come up time and time again with this discussion we just had about victims having a voicing system and informing judges. One thing that our state, I came from North Carolina where I was a victim as an advocate, that's my background. It's very helpful that there were victim witness assistants or advocates housed in law enforcement and every prosecutor's offices. We don't have that in Wyoming. It's kind of hit or miss, and in some areas we have a lot of concentration on. If you remember the slide where it showed the number of programs per county, obviously the bigger population counties have more programs, and what that can mean is, for example, Laramie County has a victim witness program in both the police department, sheriff's department, prosecutor's office. We have a standalone nonprofit shelter. We have a child advocacy center, and we're very resource rich. But we have other counties, Niagara, for example, where there's one program. It's what we call a dual program. Dual in other states means both domestic violence, sexual assault. In Wyoming, all of our programs fall under that. So when I say dual, I mean they're both domestic violence, sexual assault, and victim witness. Which is fine, but what I think sometimes happens is you have folks who don't realize that, well, I'm not a victim of domestic violence, sexual assault, so I don't know if I should go to help me and get help for my other crimes that are covered under the Victims' Bill of Rights with a victim witness advocate. So one thing that I have long thought would be would be to have, whether it's statutory or however, but sort of mandate that we have victim witness programs in every county and perhaps in every prosecutor's office. Now that has a price tag. The reality is we have the money for it. What we're doing is when we don't have a victim witness in a prosecutor's office, we add that money to the domestic violence shelter so that they have that service. Because we already committed, the Division of Victim Services already has the funding and commitment to make sure that every county has a victim witness component. But I'm concerned that maybe it's not in the right place. So I think it's a little bit outside the scope of what you maybe thought I was going to mention today, but I think that having an advocate in a prosecutor's office, I heard Ms. Trent mention that it's so helpful. Maybe we have an advocate, and I get to talk to that advocate, and I get more information about what the victim experienced or what their needs are. I think that would improve our restitution collection because we'd be talking to victims. We just have a more formalized system for getting the victim's voice heard in the criminal justice
Do you
system.
have specific recommended language for the bill draft on that topic today, or is that something you might want to come back with in November to pitch for an individual member that carries the bill draft?
I would defer that to the committee. I can absolutely work with those, so it's not reinventing the wheel.
concern is if we don't have language today, then the public doesn't have the opportunity to focus on it.
I think we have something for the, but I'll discuss with Ella, so I can discuss with other members of the legislature whether or not this is an individual issue. I'd also work with Tara, your coalition.
Thank you,
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Representative.
Quick question. You stated that there's already funding in your department, so there actually wouldn't be an increase in the budget you could handle, or I mean, through that bill, the increase would come out of your budget.
Chairman, President, right. What we do is, again, we have that pot of money that's already allocated, a large portion of that surcharge money, which by the way is not general fund money, it's fines and fees from criminal acts. And yeah, what we do is redirect it. What we currently do is if the county attorney wants to have a victim witness program, that funding is immediately earmarked, for lack of a better word, to them. If they don't, it rolls back into the community nonprofit program. And it's been a good system that works, but this is just something that I think would be helpful. I currently have, I'm not going to call out counties, but I see counties where it's not working, and it would be very beneficial to have a victim witness person in the Washington.
Sounds like we do have a potential bill sponsor.
Perhaps.
All right. Committee, any other questions of Ms. Chambers? And we're talking about page 3, victims with crime compensation. Okay.
So sorry, Mr. Chair. I don't know if it's appropriate to even ask, but through you, Mr. Chairman, was Ms. Chambers asking for a bill to be drafted regarding statutory guidelines for the good cause, or was she, or I wasn't sure what the outcome of that was.
I think that's what I heard, but we'll let that be the discretion of the committee.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Thank you very much. Other agencies want to weigh in on this particular one? Other agency comments? Public comments on this topic. Page 3, section, public comment. Okay, we're going to bring it back to the committee. Committee? Yes.
I move that we ask OSO to draft the bill relative to point 8, utilizing this chambers as a resource in determining how long to set the time limit. Perhaps work on some wording for a good cause that would be less subjective.
Did I hear 36 or 48 months?
Well, let's plug in 36.
Okay. Second. Motion and a second. For a motion. Discussion on the motion amendments. Motion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Okay. Thank you. Excuse me. I didn't go in public comment. Good. All right, folks, we are over to page 5. Using supervision incentives and sanctions to promote positive behavior change. Pelka.
Recognizing that, Mr. Chairman, recognizing the time, I think the 2 policies here that would require consideration for bill drafting is letter A and letter C. We had talked yesterday that regarding the projected growth in your prison population and your levels of crowding, that there are 2 main drivers of that growth. 2 main drivers of the growth in prison admissions. The first is the admissions, the volume of people coming back to prison for the first time following a revocation from probation and parole. So letter A, Mr. Chairman, revise Wyoming sanctions and incentives matrix to increase the certainty, predictability, and proportionality of responses applied to people on probation and parole. Looking at your the PRISM matrix, this is where we're focusing on how probation and parole officers use the intermediate sanctions and ultimately ISP, ACC, jail dips, looking at ways that you could provide greater structure to ensure that those sanctions are exhausted and that they're used in a predictable, certain, and proportional way. States that have adjusted their sanctions matrix or the PRISM matrix have sanctioned people in the community and stop their behavior at that moment, and also directed them to programs to promote longer-term behavioral change. So the aim of letter A is to increase your capacity to sanction in the community, and therefore reduce your probation parole revocations in prison.
Questions? All right. Talk about bill draft. You have specific suggestions this point?
Mr. Chairman, at this moment, I think I would, there's a section in the DOC statutes concerning their use of administrative sanctions and allowing them to apply them. I would focus on that section and I'll stop here because Jen has expertise in specific states that have done this, and she might have specific language in mind.
Okay.
But no pressure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we can help work with LSO to provide a framework that doesn't, that provides guidance and structure, but allows the department the ability to be flexible in exactly what falls where in terms of a matrix and the utilization of effective strategies, but provides more kind of a structural framework for the administration of sanctions.
Okay, so our suggestion is you recognize need for statutory change. You don't have it specifically at this time, but you could have it fairly quickly so it can be circulated and available. Okay. Questions so far from the committee? On that specific topic, Department of Corrections, any input at this point? On A.
Mr. Chairman, Bob Langford, Department of Corrections Director. I would defer to the committee in regards to whether that framework needs to be statutory or not. If it was not, I will say that we will work internally to address the issue. But again, statute survives my administration, so if you don't have that,
Okay. Thank you. Any other agency comments out there? State agency comments? Anything the court would like to add to this? Mandatory implementation. Okay. Public comment. Public comment, and we're only on A, which is a fairly specific question. Okay. All right, maybe hold on to that one. And down on paragraph C, Mr. Pelka.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Letter A results the volume of probation parole revocations hitting your prisons. Letter C involves the length of stay they spend in prison. You remember that 54% of your prison admissions are people revoked from probation parole. And depending on how A is structured in statute and rule and training and execution, you should see a reduction in the number of people who require a full-blown revocation admission to prison. Letter C involves the people who have exhausted the community sanctions, and the decision is made to revoke and either incarcerate or re-incarcerate. We noted challenges on both sides of the coin regarding courts and parole regarding people who have not been convicted of a new felony offense, but who have violated the conditions to the point where they can no longer remain on supervision under the discretion of either of those agencies. What Wyoming would benefit from is a swifter and more cost-effective response to people returning to prison on a revocation or violating their conditions of supervision with no new felony conviction. An option that states have used includes extending a waiver option to the probation or parole violator that, if accepted, would direct that person instantly into a shorter period of incarceration, which could be served in a consenting jail with reimbursement from the state or in a prison. And in either of those options, you're delivering some level of programming to re-engage with a continuity of care following them back into the community. The benefit of this approach is it ties the response following a revocation action more closely to the behavior that got them there. It allows them to receive a portion of programming while they are incarcerated, building toward a return to the community. It avoids the max out issue. It is that not in all cases you can say, but it will have an effect in reducing the max outs. It'll address some of the people who are coming back for short terms, awaiting revocation hearing or a full parole board revocation hearing. It's a way of, with letter A, it beefs up your community level sanctions. With letter C, it beefs up your responses available after revocation using incarceration. So the big picture we explained earlier on is the keys to averting growth in your prison population involves both letter A, which is reducing the volume of people coming back, and letter C, managing the amount of time they serve incarcerated so that before they return to supervision.
Yes, Representative.
No. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Pelka, does that mean that this short period of incarceration, is this going to the county jail for a brief period of time, kind of like the 24/7 program, I believe is that where you're looking at it, and then there has to be some compensation to the county jail to take these funds?
Mr. Chairman, absolutely yes. County jail or state prison, county jail could be a good fit if the jail consents. There already is a framework for a violation sanction of up to 90 days that can be served in jails that are consenting and that receive reimbursement. And the individual accesses contract community behavioral health services while they're there, allowing a return to supervision. So essentially this option is available for the community level violators, would be extended to the people who are revoked if they reach that level, and that could be served in a prison or a jail, and then they would return to supervision. So it would come down to logistically which would make the most sense, and this is our sense of how the policy could be implemented, and we'd be happy to work with LSO, happy to work with DOC and other stakeholders on, and parole board of course, on any, and courts on any implementation issues. But from where we sit, this is how we envision the policy, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so swift and certain consequence for parole violators. Okay. Questions? Yes, Representative.
Mr. Chairman, just a question, Mr. Pelka. How does this relate to what I thought was passed just this last legislative session about the quick dip?
24/7 on DUI technology.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure if the representative is referring to the 2 to 3 day jail sanction option. That is on the high end of the DOC sanction matrix. Officers can impose those immediate sanctions, 2 to 3 days in a jail with compensation. This is imagining a higher level violation for someone who has really exceeded appropriate levels of community level sanctions, and a court or a parole board determines this person needs to be incarcerated. The addition is it's streaming in some level of programming to reconnect them to that and then prepare for reentry.
I think to add clarity, it should be instead of kind of that intermediate sanction that the DOC utilizes, it would be at revocation for technical violators, at revocation to serve a shortened period and then return it back to supervision to reduce the length of those max outs that individuals would receive on probation or parole. They're kind of that full sentence. They would serve a shortened sentence and return to supervision.
Okay. Any other questions about paragraph C? Okay. Thank you, Department of Corrections.
Mr. Chairman, Bob Weckerly, Director, Department of Corrections again. In regards to C, certainly any options that we have available, sanction individuals in lieu of full placement in prison for revocation is something that we are very interested in, as long as the funding comes with it. And also, as I mentioned yesterday, currently part of the concern is over the Prison Rape Elimination Act. Compliance of jails in the state. Jails that are PREA compliant. PREA requires that the Department of Corrections only contract with PREA certified jails or take it into the criminal justice grant money coming from the Fed. So without PREA compliance, basically what we're saying is that the burn grant money and other money that's being distributed to the drug intervention and other aspects of the state would be reduced 10% per year of non-compliance.
So that can be taken care of, quality. Okay. All right. Any questions, Mr. Lander, Department of Corrections? Or thank you. Any other agency input on this one? Yes.
Mr. Chairman, just a point of clarification.
Again, your mic for the record.
Yes, Your Honor. Chairman. Mike Causey, Executive Director of the Enforced Gold. As a point of clarification, are we going to be using this as the quick dip, as the representative mentioned, or is this something that would require a board hearing? It wasn't quite clear what the intent behind this was.
Mrs. Kisela?
With the process that is envisioned is that it would give the ability for the individual who's on supervision to sign a waiver that would need sign off by the board or by the courts, but wouldn't require a full hearing that would allow them to do a shorter revocation stay with return to supervision. So it would require less resources on the judicial and the parole board with the signing of the waiver.
Mr. Chairman, just for, I guess, we certainly look forward to any draft that comes forward, working with the committee, also other stakeholders. One of the concerns that obviously comes up is how complicated the process will be and whether or not the system is really designed to effectuate that sort of a quick process while making sure that we support everything their due process rights. So certainly we look forward to seeing what the proposal is.
All right, and in answer to your question about funding, Director Lambert, I think the alternative is we either figure out a way to deal with the ones that are appropriate on the short term, or we have much larger funding loads taken through the process. So I don't know if you're treated like additional funding, but it actually looks like this is a tool that could work. It will reduce your funding level on the package. It reduces the need for those dollars.
Mr. Chairman, you may recall that on the quick dip legislation that passed, we had a budget request for that was basically for a 2-year period that was kept to 1-year funding with the recommendation that we could report back on that. We have had issues finding appropriate lenders to provide the treatment as well as jails that were willing to do that. Just now we finally have a program in place. But there was an additional cost that could not be absorbed. So continuing that funding or expanding that funding stream as part of the legislation being necessary. What I was suggesting in regards to the jails was possibly some direction that would provide a pool of money available to jails to help them provide one-time funding to do things like security cameras, so that they can meet the state's needs, and the state would not be in a position of basically not being able to carry through statute simply because we can't contract.
Should this end up in a bill format, I appreciate it when you look at the additional impact weighed against the relief of days when that $135 a day, when it wouldn't be jail, it's full long-term revocation. Let's look at the math and see what the benefit versus the cost is. We'll do that. Thank you. Any other public comment? Other agency comments on this particular? For now, we're talking about full section 5 here, paragraphs A and C. There's opportunities for bill drafts, any conversation, any input. All right, back to the committee. Committee, what's your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I move that also be directed to draft a bill on revising sanctions and incentives matrix to increase the certainty, predictability, and proportionality of responses to people on probation and parole.
Okay, we've got a motion. Second. A second. This one is not quite as specific, but with what you've heard and with CSG and you'll see in the section, are you feel comfortable able to come up with a bill draft? No. I was afraid that was coming. What do you need, Ted? What would help?
Policy direction. And certainly, I heard CSG offer to write the bill for us, and that's fine, but the direction to have more certainty consistency is very broad. There's a lot of different ways to accomplish that. We need some policy direction.
Mr. Pelka, with the assistance of the Department of Corrections, Jennifer, got confident that you can come up with a fairly concise powerful bill draft regarding paragraph A as moved and seconded?
Mr. Chairman, absolutely yes. Be more than happy to work however we can. And I heard you mention, Mr. Chairman, the desire for this work to be done soon in order to get a bill draft out as early as possible. And we are more than happy to, as we said, front load this work to ensure that happens as quickly as possible without delay. I understand your words earlier, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Any direction based on the motion that's been made? Or are you contingent, of course, on having a concise and powerful suggested bill draft to work with, then go back into your words and have time to review what's a pretty short term?
As I understand the current direction, is we will work with CSG folks, come up with their policy recommendations to present in a form better for the occasions there.
Looking at your calendar, do you have a timeline that, short of receiving the information by a drop dead date, you have an out date? Okay. We're not setting you up for failure or an impossible circumstance.
Probably we need substantial direction.
Ready? With that, we're ready for a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you. That's on A. Is there a motion on C? Kind of goes with it, and with this one, just not to quick give a swift and certain consequence to deal with people that may find some intermediate ground, say full ratification back in the system. Right. We have a motion on C as described. And rather than put Representative Pelka on the spot, that short language for that motion gave us earlier. Mr. Pelka, before we go to the second.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, letter C addresses the response of corrections letter C involves the outcome following a probation or a parole revocation, not just a violation in the community. For someone who has exceeded the level of community sanctions is being recommended for a revocation due to violating the conditions of their supervision. This policy would create an opportunity for that violator to sign a waiver that would create a swifter and more cost-effective period of incarceration at the probation or the parole revocation period. During that time, they would receive some programming to re-engage. And after completing that term of incarceration, they would return to the community to supervision in most cases. An example of how this could function is the current sanction option available for 90 days in jail at the consent of the jail, reimbursed to the jail, jail time, including contract community treatment. That model could be applied on your revocations for people who are coming back in front of the court or in front of the parole board for a revocation. They would be able to sign a waiver that would include a short, cost-effective period of incarceration with some programming, followed in most cases by a return to supervision.
So as I understood Representative Pelka's motion, a short-term waiver, dependent term of incarceration of up to 90 days involving additional programs to give people that additional step before they just do a full revocation back to the prison. Is that your motion?
Yes, indeed.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Corey, Brian?
Mr. Chairman, I think what would be helpful perhaps is connecting this with House Bill 42 from last year, which does provide for up to a 90-day jail term that includes some form of treatment involved in that. I guess the question is, would an individual simply be waiting? If an individual is brought to to a revocation proceeding, is the request to have that individual be able to waive that and be sent straight to jail?
Mr. Chairman, in our contemplation of it, the answer is yes, that person would be given the option of waiving the revocation hearing at the probation or the parole. And in many cases, the incentive to them is by bypassing the full hearing process, they may serve less time in prison overall. Ultimately, it's going to be a more meaningful sanction because they will have to receive some programming in jail or in prison. And in most cases, they will have to return to supervision afterwards. That would address the issue involving the max outs on the parole supervision side. About 38% of people returning to prison on a parole violation will max out, so you would help to address that issue. It would also help to provide a swifter and more cost-effective response for that revocation hearing.
Before we go too much farther, invite the judiciary to weigh in on this conversation. Today. Is that mic turned on back?
There's a little button on the base of it, on the base of the microphone.
As it relates, Tim Day from District Court, as it relates to probation revocation proceedings, of course, people are entitled to due process on that. They have a right to have a lawyer. And so, and also, I'd be curious on any draft bill, of course, what the goal of the courts would be, that the courts would be able to obviously sign off on that if that's what they wanted to do, or to the extent that that might more or less alter the sentence. I'd want to kind of know what input the judiciary had on that, and make sure that the rights of the offender were being guarded on that process. So it would be hard for us to probably give you more further input until we saw something like that. But those are considerations that I think should be addressed.
Does the waiver process answer some of those depending on the terms of the waiver, or have we gone a little broad?
Well, not all waivers are created equal, and you'd have to see that. And I would think that would have to be vetted by the judiciary.
Okay. There's some challenges. Yes, Representative Now,
Mr. Chairman, with this statute, if it would be in play, there's obviously a cost. For it to go forward, there would have to be money available. So I'm kind of curious what the cost would be. I mean, it'd be estimate only, of the numbers that might possibly be utilized in this program, but we got to have a cost figure.
Offset the savings.
Correct. Well, if there's a savings, that'd be great.
Yes,
Mr. Chairman, just to directly, I think one way to look at cost avoidance and actual cost for implementation, the amount of time that a probation revocation serves in prison is 19 months. The amount of time your average parole revocation serves in prison is 11 months. So if the length of time someone will ultimately serve is less than that, you're going to avoid bed days over that time period. So 19 to lower. And that's the effort in providing a swifter connection into incarceration-based programming. So with that difference between the amount of time a person who is eligible for this revocation sanction and someone what they're currently serving, that difference, that balance would allow for both potential cost avoidance and also funding to make this work. And this precedes a bit on the following section. The following section is entirely focused on how any savings could be reinvested into increasing access to behavioral health treatment.
This is Jennifer Kisela from CSG. I think there's also, an ability for savings with the waiver process to reduce length of time. Individuals are in jail awaiting revocation hearings by the judiciary, and then also The waiver process can reduce caseloads on the judiciary having to hold full hearings through the waiver process that's signed off by the judges. Additionally, I think from a cost perspective, where there's the biggest kind of upfront cost is around the programming and services for those individuals on that violation is where that kind of initial upfront cost would probably come into play.
Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this might be for the director. They have that, regardless of that inmate's in that prison, they have that daily cost regardless. So there won't be a, I mean, there's a cost savings on food, different things of that nature, clothing and so forth. They still have their standard cost. Now, as you stated, there's that cost for the mental evaluations, those things. That's where I'm wondering where the money's coming from.
So what I'm hearing is the real difference is if this is an up to 90 day, you're looking at the savings between 90 day and an average of 11 or 19 months on that $135 per day. Some of that money is applied to the treatment program up front with the goal of essentially being more effective in keeping people out of prison that don't need it. And then this also goes back to one of our initial concerns on bed days, full prison capacity. This feels like this is one of the bigger parts of this whole justice reinvestment and opportunities to talk about more efficient use of our both prisons and better outcomes for our population. There are some questions to this. This does seem like it's worthy of the bill draft. We've got a motion and a second on it. A lot of questions. This does seem to be one of those key things we're really focused on with overcrowding and are we getting our best use out of our prison things. Representative Jennings.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I just, and we're working on C, and I like the idea to this one a lot more. But do you already have a figure or something in the third sentence down? It says who commit persistent and high-level violations. So I'm assuming that trigger, that threshold there, do you already have an idea? Will that be in the bill draft, or do you envision it in the draft? What does that look like a little more? If you could just explain a little more to that persistent and high level.
Mr. Chairman, we're for that persistent and high level, we're actually pulling that from the Wyoming DOC's PRISM violation sanction. That's the most high-end sanctions that they can apply in response to violations. That's the ISP, the 1 to 2 days in jail, the ACC referral. I use that language to indicate that the people eligible for 4C have exceeded all of those options. They have not committed a new felony violation led to a conviction. They are returning to a court, to a parole board following multiple community violations that can no longer be managed in the community. They need to have a period of jail or prison, and that would guide eligibility for this.
Jennifer.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And typically what we see in states is that there's exclusionary criteria built into the bill language that would exclude new felony offenses, violent and sexual misdemeanor offenses, and absconding violations from being eligible for this. Those individuals would go through the full revocation process in front of the parole board or in front of the judge and not be eligible for the waiver process.
Yes, Senator Anselmi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to direct everyone's attention back to slide 73, just because as we're talking about the stuff we did and people realize that basically we're spending $30 million per year in incarcerating people for supervision violations is what the slide says. And that the juvenile violations, not of a felony nature, but probably the drug use by the state, that's kind of a portion of the bill would be important. So everyone can reference back to what you guys discussed. Thank you.
Director Lambert.
Mr. Chairman, just one comment in regards to suggestion to LSO and CSG as they draft this is to look back at a draft that we previously put forward to allow for revocation placements for up to 90 days and then return on probation and parole. It was a draft and part of the larger package that wasn't adopted. But included in that with language that allow more flexibility in terms of where to place an individual. Contract facility, county jail, or prison. I don't want to exclude the possibility of DOD being interested in providing some replication space for this purpose. So I just wanted to make that suggestion before the topic goes. Thank you.
Anything based on what you've heard recently from the judiciary, anything else to add or concerns? Does this have the potential to help or hurt both?
I just think if some of those concerns are addressed, and they can probably be more intelligently addressed after a bill is drafted. But certainly, I think that to the degree that it gives the court more options instead of just sending someone to prison for the rest of their term, I think that that's a great option.
Thank you. All right. Betty, any other questions at this point? Okay, agency or public comment on this amendment? Bring an amendment. We already have a motion. I guess we'll keep it up here. All right, committee, you ready to vote? All in favor of the motion? Let me just ask this first. Are we okay, Tori? I know this is a kind of a shotgun. That's a dangerous question.
Honestly, I'm sitting here and I'm hearing different things. But again, I think as with the subsection A bill, it seems as though LSO is going to have to rely on CSG to as we were sitting here, I understood this more to be fettering the discretion of sentencing courts in these types of situations rather than giving more options. But that's perhaps my misunderstanding of CST's recommendation here. But so with that understanding, we'll be happy to draft the bill. It's not completely clear to me what bill does at this point. And I understand the general goal is frustration, but it gives we need more direction, frankly.
If you could look at with CSG's input and then look to see if it is more appropriate as a standalone or appropriate as an amendment to the previous year's work, as Brian had mentioned. Either way. Let's try it. And, where we end up, we may have to sort it out, or it may rise or fall in November. But
and again, I don't want to sound reluctant to do the bill draft. We're happy to do it. It's just that as I sit here today, I'm not clear on exactly what it looks like. So if the committee is voting for CSG to work with us to come up with what they're talking about, I'm happy to.
Is that another cut to any sense of where this get a level of confidence at this point go forward?
No. No, and I'm concerned right now, Mr. Chairman, that perhaps we're doing a lot of circling and unproductive work. I've been frustrated from the point of hearing that this conversation was had 3 or 4 years ago, where we were trying to accomplish the exact same goals, and in fact, bills were drafted and policies implemented, and yet that did not result in any kind of meaningful impact. And also, nonetheless, so I'm quite frustrated at this point. I think we need to regroup and refocus our efforts, as I think Senator Anselmi Dalton indicated, to go back and focus on what we're trying to actually solve with the problem as identified by CSG, which is we're spending $30 million on probation revocations and supervision, which is a number that we can target and reduce. So I agree with Representative Jennings that this is about cost reductions for the needless expenditure of state dollars regarding unnecessary probation revocations and supervision costs. And so focusing back in on that, and also in an effort to reduce our prison populations, which is the primary focus of criminal justice reinvestment or reform, or whatever term we want to call it this year. But it is to reduce our prison population. And so going back, regrouping and refocusing on those efforts in a very narrowly tailored way, I think is important. And I think we can achieve results and measurable outcomes for this committee and for the state. So I don't want to get lost in some of the minutia that is being suggested here and overwhelming ourselves with bill drafts associated with some of the more minutia-like concepts that we've learned as a result of this report.
Welcome, Mr. Chairman. Just wanted on our behalf, we are dedicated to kind of looking at the 2-month or so window between this meeting and the next one, and really working intensively to provide clear, guidance with the intent of 5A and C and other policies in here, providing examples and with other states and approaches that could work to assist LSO in its work. If perhaps that would offer an opportunity for a midpoint update to the JJC, an opportunity for members to receive a progress report on how it's coming along and what the current draft looks like, and pros and questions, or however we can assist the committee to make sure that it feels assisted and supported in the following 2 months to maximize the utility of the November meeting. We are at your disposal.
So before we vote on this, I'd just like to talk about the same condition of 2 weeks.
Okay.
If you could come up with clear, concise language that gives us a positive outcome. Always remembering it's not about reducing prison populations. The first priority is keeping our communities safe. If we can't hit that in 2 weeks, then that's kind of where we need to set a line. But yes, Representative Beil.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I guess I got a question back to Brian where you stated that bill we drafted last year. Would this just be maybe a possibility of making an amendment into that bill with this C? I mean, do we have to make a new bill? Can we just amend the current bill that we have?
That's what we challenge them to look at and see if it's a simple amendment.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Beil, I think it's possible. I think there's still some direction that we would need to decide if, the framework that CSG has presented, at least as I understand it, would be something that would fit with what we already have. I guess one of my hangups in particular is, at the end of paragraph C, you had individuals who have exhausted the appropriate juvenile sanctions. One immediate question that comes to my mind is, are the sanctions that the legislature passed in House Bill 42 last session, are those community-based sanctions? Because those already include, those 2 options. There's one option of detention and extending facility for up to 90 days with substance abuse treatment. That's one example. So I'm not sure if the direction is to broaden this, is to include some sort of waiver. To be honest, Mr. Chairman, I'm quite unsure at this point.
Director.
Mr. Chairman, kind of up here for a question. Perhaps I can shed a little bit of light in that the bill that was passed last year focused directly on substance abuse, all violations, where you go back up to 90 days for jail placement, treatment, upon successful completion to be reinstated on probation and parole. What we're talking about here is other revocations, basically, or expanding it to include other revocations that could lead, may not be directly related to substance abuse, but still end up in them being placed in prison because all other sanctions have been exhausted. So it's trying to close that additional gap. And what we had originally proposed was two pieces of that. One was the substance abuse 90-day lesson. And then I think it was up to 180 days, is that correct? And back into a revocation center for basically treatment and reviewing and addressing issues. And it's kind of envisioned as a revocation center that we can contract with, Department of Corrections will contract with somebody who will be placed in that revocation center in lieu of full revocation, complete the program, and then again be reinstated on probation. So it was a larger group. It wasn't just substance abuse. So I think that's why this seems suggested here is to close that issue gap over and above what we currently have versus just substance abuse violating.
So Alice, so with that idea, if we can't come up with something meaningful or clear, has potentially make a positive difference in the next couple of weeks, next 2 weeks. Not asking for you to create tension. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
Okay. All right, thank you. Folks, it is 11:24. We have one section left. Anybody need 5 minutes, we can be quiet. Okay. On to section 6.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And section 6 is one that is saved. It's located at the end of the packet, but it's probably the most cross-cutting issue that runs all the way from law enforcement arrest activity to court filings, to supervision outcomes, to prison admissions. It is the issue of people with unaddressed substance use, mental health, co-occurring needs in Wyoming's criminal justice system, specifically those on probation and parole. The aim of this policy is probably best captured under letter A, and I think A could, perhaps as we discuss it, A could be inclusive of the 4 elements that fall below it. Letter A involves expanding the availability of timely evidence-based treatment for people on probation and parole who have substance addiction and or mental illness across Wyoming. So we've just begun talking prior to this meeting with the department, prior to this meeting in terms of last week, with Department of Corrections and Department of Health leadership and staff about what this policy would entail. Essentially, as we presented it to them, it is the reinvesting of estimated savings into a behavioral health program jointly administered by the Department of Corrections and the Department of Health that would leverage the assets that each agency provides in implementing a behavioral health program. The Department of Corrections would apply its assets in establishing a referral and evaluation process for eligibility to the program. It would establish discharge criteria and processes, program oversight, auditing, and evaluation. It would essentially sign a memorandum of understanding, just based on our elementary understanding of how this might work. We put forward the idea that a memorandum of understanding from monies held by the DOC to the Department of Health, thereby leveraging the Department of Health's expertise in contracting with the community mental health and substance use providers to provide the contracting for delivering supervision, support, and monitoring of caseloads, connecting individuals most in need of treatment who pose the highest risk of reoffending with high-quality, community-based mental health substance use treatment. The contract providers would receive payments in a way that provides certainty that by working with this population, they will receive adequate compensation, and they will bill any available third parties for services rendered. That's more detail, but I guess the big picture that we imagined in proposing this to the Department of Corrections and Department of Health is to figure out how they can both partner at the state level to provide funding prioritizing the probation and parole population most in need of treatment at the greatest risk of reoffense. The reason that population is targeted is because those populations are driving costs both in Wyoming's community behavioral health system already, as well as in Wyoming's community supervision system currently. But the way that the two systems are functioning, they're not able to leverage their both of their assets to provide what individual might need in a given jurisdiction in Wyoming. So in certain areas that could be actual treatment needs to be funded. In other areas that could be care coordination to make sure the person is completing, following through, and moving forward across their obligations to the supervision term, also to the treatment provider. It also could mean a peer support specialist. It really means to address what is the current challenges, the current barriers that exist for people on probation and parole who are referred to treatment to actually receive timely and specialized treatment. It's reflected both in the courts that impose probation on people and require them to get treatment. Despite the open access nature of your community behavioral health system, this population poses special challenges that require additional policies and resources to achieve the outcomes that you need to avoid the costly revocations. And then on the parole supervision side, you are funding substance addiction treatment behind the walls, but there is no certainty that that continuity of care will follow that person based on level of need, based on risk, into the community. So the cost on that end can result in, can be caused by someone you've already invested money in behind the walls, already invested incarceration resources in, they come back because they fail, because they can't remain clean and sober. On the probation side, if they fail on probation, following failure to complete a behavioral health treatment referral, they may come to prison for the very first time. They could have been someone who could have been directed or to a different path along that way. So I laid out much more detail for our vision, so you had a kind of longer term, bigger picture view. In terms of agency participation, they've only engaged in initial conversations with us, the Department of Health, the Department of Corrections, and also the community mental health and substance use providers. So there's much more to go in that. I feel that what I describe in policy in terms of level of specificity and drafting can be determined by members of the committee and by the agencies and by LSO about what would be a good fit. Essentially, I think what we're proposing with the policy description is just some way of not just providing resources for resources' sake, but providing a structure around that to ensure they're reaching the people who benefit most, not only to help promote recovery from mental health or substance use disorder, but avoid the cost of a revocation through recidivism.
You have specific suggestions on statutory change, or is it more policy and department cooperative efforts on realigning that?
Mr. Chairman, we imagine policy, and just to ensure that the dollars that go into this have the high level of standards and quality that you would want to see to be able to provide statewide reach and to grow it and to track it. If there are principles and kind of goals and expectations that the committee would have, with that, we'd be happy to work with LSO in the next 2 weeks to kind of outline that, as well as providing examples from other states. I feel that I'm going probably above and beyond what I've talked to health and corrections about in the interest of providing the needed specificity. So I apologize to the agencies if I'm kind of going into more detail than we discussed. But this is, again, is something that can be potentially prioritized in the next 2 weeks with the agency's help. But again, because of the time of our work, this is the first time I suspect that some of them are hearing the greater details on this survey.
I'm not seeing a rush in 2 weeks to come up with statutory language, just maybe more long-term solutions between now and November, with both Department of Corrections and Department of Health coming back and possibly come up with some long-term recommendations that the new executive branch have something in their hand to say, folks, here's a roadmap if you'd like to take advantage of it going forward. So,
Mr. Chairman, from an outside technical assistance provider perspective, we have, the answer to that I feel is yes, and that we have a call scheduled with health staff, with correction staff, with the mental health and substance use centers, and a lot of detail that I think we can delve into with them, and it may fit, therefore, to a longer term outline.
Questions of good folks at CSG committee? This topic at this point? Yes.
Let's talk about labor corrections, power corrections. I would just add that with new funding, based on our experience, it would be useful to have some very structured statutory guidance In fact, this would be a new program specifically aimed at this population that crosses all agencies. And having that very structured requirements, I think would be beneficial for both agencies as well as for the treatment providers. Give us the ability to refer to statute on these are the requirements for this population, prioritize that population. In effect, it provides some statutory guidance around outcomes and deliverables that are difficult in practice to implement for state funding protection.
Are you talking about a clear, specific recommendation for statutory language today or something to be developed in the near future?
Mr. Chairman, I would defer to CSG and LSO in regards to the timeframes for that. But I'm just suggesting that if this ultimately results in expanded funding for this program and for that population, that having statutory, very clear statutory parameters would be extremely useful.
Pelka. Mr. Chairman, if the director and any counterparts from the health department that would care to weigh in would support it, we'd be more than happy to work with them in the next 2 weeks on language to get the process started. Language on the most basic level could include the DOC and Department of Health shall establish and implement a community behavioral health program to provide comprehensive community-based services for people who have serious behavioral health conditions. Again, I don't want to speak on behalf of agencies or even imply. I know something I don't. I don't know how they would feel about that, but perhaps in 2 weeks, the very basic contours of the program could be established per the director's advice, and that would provide a foundation for building on it over time, longer term. Perspective.
Mr. Chairman.
Carol is here. Just to be clear, the 2 week timeline we've been talking about has been about producing specific language, if possible, for LSO on motions and programs. So we're not, at this point, we are not talking about that same deadline. We're talking more about it here. Please.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Christensen. I am the Senior Administrator for the Behavioral Health Division in the Department of Health. I'm also here representing Director Morrison, who is not able to attend. I would reassured by what you just said, Mr. Chairman. I definitely at the table. We want to continue this dialogue and really work through. We acknowledge as the Behavioral Health Division and the Department of Health that the mental health and substance abuse treatment is significant, and we need to be at the table with our providers to help address this. I think my concerns are at this point that we have just been in this dialogue for a couple of weeks and need more time to really work through what is being proposed and how it best works. I think in deference to our providers, we also need to make sure resources are there for that. And we do have priority populations in our contracts with them already that they're meeting the needs of those populations, but they add more without additional funding, I think, isn't realistic. And then, I said this, Marc, during several of our calls, I think we also just want to make sure we know the scope of what we're talking about. So we have not been able to do that crosswalk of the data of these clients who we are serving already in our system that are in corrections. We have a meeting scheduled, we have a crosswalk, we have our directorship of policy research and evaluation ready to stand by and help us with that, along with CSG, but that to me is what dividing the problem here as well. So we're working on that pretty actively, and we'll move forward with that. So I think more time is needed for us to make sure we're framing this correctly, understanding what the issues are, what the services are, and the scope of how many people who aren't currently being served by our system, or maybe only being served partially need more intensive treatment to understand how to implement this. But we're at the table for an MOU for working with corrections.
Questions for the committee? Staff? At this point,
just, Mr. Chairman, I know that the House Chairman of Health have been interested in not aware of how much Department of Health has been reporting to that committee about this. Mr. Pelka.
I'm not from the department. I'm sorry, I'm cutting you off. I'm so sorry. I just wanted to indicate as an outside technical assistance provider, I understand that Labor, Health, and Social Services Committee is having its interim committee next week, and I told Representative Barlow I would share all of the information from this presentation and make ourselves available. I cannot be on site for that committee's meeting, but I did tell the chairman that we'd be happy to share any materials. He expressed interest in what's coming together and like to provide it to his members of this committee.
So let's go ahead and open this up for any agency or government, judiciary, and the agencies who would like to add additional comments on this part. Okay, any public comment? This one? All right, let's bring it back up to the committee. Maybe for an overview on it. When we look at this, if you look at the policy options and the analysis, this seems to be a very critical part of our efforts and needs going forward. Looks like this is maybe one that, as Ms. Newman said, needs some time to flesh it out, work on a roadmap going forward. It might be a much larger cost in the bill draft. Any specific action we can take at this time, other than to recognize this really does get back to another critical point of changing minds. That's my thoughts on that. Any desires, discussion, drafts, comments? Mr. Co-Chair?
Mr. Chairman, no, as I heard the discussion, it seemed to me that A and E were the key points of these options. One, just simply more money, be able to provide 4 times the treatment, and the second one, more coordination between probation, parole, and the mental health providers. So those 5, like A and E, were the keys. I don't know if they translate to a bill today.
Maybe a conversation.
Conversation. Yeah, and the question comes to my mind, does more coordination mean expanding workforce, provide a coordinator, or is it just an internal thing between 2 agencies where these groups begin to communicate their and share what can be shared about this particular group of clients?
Anything else on this particular section 6? All right, Mr. Pelka, Jennifer, Chad, thank you for what you've done all the time, and thank you for accepting the challenge of running midnight hours, a couple of weeks, but also kind of a longer term discussion to talk about. Tori, Brian, any questions? We close out this part of the agenda. No, thank you. Challenge you with some pretty big leaps, but I hope putting those 2 thresholds doesn't give us some help. If we're not able to hit those, recognize that as one surprise. We don't have information that helps. Okay. Thank you. Okay, we are at 12:42 on our agenda. Let's go ahead and see what we can do with starting on the court side of this. Folks, this is on your agenda. It's judicial updates. Pre-release, first one off, Judge Christensen. And then we'll go into some bill drafts. We'll take this as far as we can before we break for lunch.
afternoon, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Chairman Kirkbride and Chairman Christensen. Thank you for resetting this meeting to Laramie to allow some of us to attend the Wyoming State Bar this week as well. I appreciate that. You've heard from me before on bail and bond, why we're looking at that, and what our progress is on that. One of the findings of that March 2016 U.S. Department of Justice Ferguson report is the courts must not employ bail or bond practices that cause indigent defendants to be incarcerated.
I'm sorry, that big mic's picking you up. If you pull it a little closer.
Brian Christensen, of the Trumbull County Circuit Court. And I've been here before on bail and bond reform. Talked about the Ferguson report before. And we're trying to be proactive on who's being incarcerated on initial arrest. Our bonds to hide, we have other options. Kind of fits in with the Justice Reinvestment as well. We have other programs that can substitute for people that have been incarcerated pre-trial that we could have released on PR or lower bond if we have 24/7 programs or scrambled bracelets or and looking at partner agencies that I mentioned before, DOC, other pre-trial supervision, public defenders access, and initial appearances that might resolve several cases, which is my practice. When I have them in court with initial appearances, it's been some cases. Those kind of things. There's also things we're looking into, such as texts from the court to remind individuals to show up for court proceedings. Alleviate some failure to appearance. It's being used in drug courts across the country. It's a software program that allows for the courts to text people that don't you have court tomorrow at 10 a.m. Might also alleviate some of the concerns of failure to appear. The objectives of bail and bond are, of course, reasonably ensure the appearance of the. Oh, I'm sorry.
Not everybody's able to hear.
Where's that other place?
How about amplification? And if everybody in the back would mind moving forward. Like church folks, come on to the front. You're beyond the second row, there's seats in the front too.
You almost be happy.
Yeah. It's like,
we love your participation.
Can you hear me now?
Great.
Sorry about that.
Just ignore the mic and speak loud.
Yeah, okay.
Use your judge voice.
Yeah, I did a presentation this week at the conference, and Judge Perry went before me and said, you had a big voice, but you had a big courtroom. And I said, my courtroom wasn't quite as big, but I gave it a shot. So, we're working to amend court rules to establish Wyoming uniform request and release for individuals. How the system works, find and arrest individuals seeking the next working day for review of what the charges are that brought them into court, as well as setting the bond. On weekends, sometimes you have to wait a couple days to get in court, 3 days on some weekends. Courts do review probable cause filings on weekends as well as set bonds. We do not have the complete information that we get on working day officials, however. So we've been working on a Wyoming uniform request for release for that weekend. So we have more information instead of erring on the side that, this is charged as a domestic battery or is it a domestic assault? How serious is the risk to the victim upon release? How other conditions of that bond, things of that nature that you may be looking at. It also allows for an individual to request a bail or bond once one has been set and they have to make it. My court will ask them, can you make that bond? And if you can't, then write me a letter to review this bond and see what other conditions, especially once we have to determine appointment for that individual. So we're one of the things given to you in November. I was thinking of passing this out, and it really hasn't been vetted yet. Is our Wyoming uniform request for release form. But I'll give you this in November.
it looks pretty good. As stated, we're looking for more information, and then once we have that information, what do we do with it? Some communities do not have bail bonds in the programs, so they're either cash bonds or release bonds. So they're not able to afford the surety. If you have the surety bonds, they seem to be able to afford that better. But that becomes a bigger issue in communities that don't have that availability. As I mentioned before, other criminal justice agency programs also have a significant impact on lowering or setting unsecured bonds, such as the 24/7 program or programs that randomly test for drugs and alcohol, and some of the other agency things that I've mentioned. We're trying to be proactive as there's been some national conversation about this. It really hasn't been an issue in Wyoming, but we wanted to be ahead of the game here in case it ever did become an issue. And we want to show that we are active and we're doing this, making sure by court rules we are being proactive and addressing these kind of things with what may alleviate the need for incarceration. We have pretrial services and allow for the pretrial release of individuals who otherwise cannot afford to postpone or to bail. We mentioned before that Utah was doing a study on this as well as and we got that this summer. And I was a little disappointed. I was hoping they would give me more of the form and the things they were using. But they mainly did a research into what was the issues of not showing up to court. And they went heavily on prior criminal history. And I was talking to Judge Day, just as, I was kind of disappointed because I have way more, if not equal amount on community contacts. Are they employed? Are they 20 years citizens of our community? Are they citizens of Wyoming? Residents of Wyoming? Are they, that's what we're looking for. So what I was looking for didn't really help with, but I did go to participate in the Arizona presentation on the risk assessment on violent crime. It does an assessment with the victim and criminal history and are looking at something from an atypical event, or is this something that's continuation of the judge may not know and trying to set bonds and release, and that would have an impact on the way of bond and referring to making sure that the maximum point is safe with everything we can do. There may be, the victim saying, I want contact, but usually we don't allow contact right off. But those kind of things are addressed earlier, more efficiently with more information than having those other programs that may allow for reduction in that bond, as you're confident that they're not using drugs or alcohol while that bond to be at risk to the community. So in the next, for the next meeting, we'll be looking at rule changes, and continue to encourage the development of those programs that substitute for higher bonds and for the resources we have to reduce the number of pretrial incarcerations. I blasted that, so because I know you're behind. So
Good. All right. Yes, Representative Pelka.
I'm curious, Your Honor, have you had a chance to look at or give consideration to what California has done in terms of completely eliminating?
Only, Mr. Chairman, Representative Pelka, only as reported by the national media. It does raise concerns on how does that look if you or everybody, and then it's set for a trial, everybody's there. They don't have any, it's a member of the Community Rec Foundation Board in Casper, we used to give out free access to the community programs, and it wasn't utilized that much. But if we had a 10% buy-in, and a lot more show up, and pay more fee. If there's some sort of supervision or some sort of programming that goes along with that release, and you don't have those issues of having a bunch of witnesses show up or out-of-town witnesses, and it doesn't show up. It'll be interesting to see what happens.
negative funders to appear rates.
Thank you. Representative Stitt.
Mr. Chairman, Your Honor, thank you for being here. Years ago, I served on the federal public defender panel, and a lot of what I did were detention hearings in the federal system. The result of that was, detention hearings, you see the criteria on that. And at least in the federal system, maybe I wasn't very good at my job, but it seemed like the result was they always got detained. They just weren't ever released. So, I see that playing out, both on the point of view of, you have to have detention hearings, which might take a little bit longer than just asking the prosecutor a little bit long. So that piece of it. And then there's, what would if you get rid of cash insured bond, billing? You have to more people in jail. And then lastly, you talk about constitutional offenses. I believe that what our Constitution says that all offenses shall be bailable.
Please, Judge.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Representative Stitt. We combine those in certain courts, those initial appearances with advice of your charge, to all the advisors of your constitutional rights. That's why I mentioned in a lot of states, the public defenders do show up at those initial appearances. And that may reduce the number of cases that go forward, at least what I see. When you have public defenders show up for 1 or 2 clients, they inevitably know several other people in the panel. And we right there go through a pauper's affidavit proceeding, and one public defender said, talk about that case, if they public defender wants to go ahead and take that on, answer questions. We can be a lot more efficient in our little courts here. And if there's a stipulated bond, the courts will usually going to accept that from the state. They're going to recommend that bond initially, unless it's set by the court on the weekend without stating, but that's kind of rare. One level misdemeanors, I think you might see that. So when we do review those probable cause sheets, we do that recommendation for what the bond might be. But the extra hearings, we try to do it. We try to do it all like if you set a bond, these are your bond conditions. And that's why I say if you can't make that bond, then you're not going to do this. If it's a felony, you're not going to go accept it. I'm not going to have to give you your preliminary hearing as well. As to what was the second question?
There's a constitutional aspect to that as well.
Yeah, the constitutional aspect as to there are U.S. Supreme Court cases as well as by court rule here, you have to have set bond within 72 hours. We try to speed that up to like the next working day as well as the court's review that weekend. Probable cause has to be reviewed by a judicial officer within 48 hours.
Questions? Yes. Mr. Coach. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. Judge Christensen, you said that surety bonds aren't available in every community. Is that per court policy or because Newcastle doesn't have a business that does that?
Mr. Chairman, I think it's the latter. I think there's businesses that are set up and it can be part of community practice as well. But just somebody hasn't seen a viable business plan to come in and do a surety program in some communities. So if you might, what I would defer to Michael.
All right. Anything else? Thank you. I appreciate the insights and important challenges we're facing in our state.
I hope to have I do that right. I hope to have that uniform request for release. So I have that for you to as well as like I said, the secondary part of that would be a step letter. Everybody would have. I'm still in here, Judge. Can I give my bond?
All right. Very much. Folks, it's 11:58. Let's come back and start right at 1:30. Give you enough time to get around town, and then we will keep rolling. So appreciate everyone's attention. Sorry for the delay.
We have a lot to work our way through and appreciate your support. So we'll start right at 1:30. Members of the committee, appreciate it.